two wolf-like creatures were running headlong through the forest, but for some reason, they were running on two legs. It seemed like they were werewolves. Rapid breathing could be heard everywhere. One of the wolves looked at his companion. "Listen, what are we doing here? This place is full of orcs. Why did we come to such a remote place?" His friend winked at him over his shoulder, looked at him and smiled. "Don't worry, the orcs left a long time ago, so don't be afraid." They exchanged glances. "Listen, have you ever wondered what made them leave?" But suddenly there was a loud rumbling. The ground began to shake and crack, and a real earthquake began. The two unfortunate werewolves could barely stand on their feet. One of the wolves shouted, "Listen, bro, it's dangerous here. Let's get out of here fast. I still want to live. Where did you bring me?" But in the end, the two wolves managed to make their way further. There really were no cannibals or orcs here. They had long since fled. The two silhouettes found themselves in front of a large hole. It was a cave. The guys stood there and wondered what had made the other monsters leave. The werewolves began to squeeze forward. The cave was too narrow and it smelled damp and musty. They descended deeper and deeper. Hearing that they were in the dragon's cave, one of the wolves shouted, "Are you tired of living? If you want to go to the other world so badly, then take me with you. Why did you bring me here?" But before he could finish his sentence, the wolf slipped on a slippery rock and fell straight down. His companion wanted to help, but he was too late. And there, deep below the earth, a huge red dragon was raging. He screamed, opening his wide mouth, and his thunderous voice shook the walls of the cave. It turned out that the huge monster was trying to read a book, but unfortunately it was too small for his huge fingers and he couldn't turn the pages. The dragon plopped down on the ground, letting out steam from his nostrils, and grumbled as he tried once again to turn the ill-fated page. Somewhere nearby stood two frightened werewolves, trembling all over and not knowing what to do. A huge red dragon really did live in this cave. The two friends came closer, and one of the wolves looked curiously at what the monster was doing now. What was he doing there, and why was he shouting so loudly? With its huge claws, the dragon tried unsuccessfully to turn over a small leaf. It was the book of the great sorcerer, Terold Krovod, but unfortunately, it was too small and fragile. The red dragon's name was Carcierin, but everyone just called him Aaron. He was a little over 300 years old, which by dragon standards made him quite small, almost a child. Carefully turning the pages, the dragon tried to read. Fortunately, they had good eyesight, so the small print was not a problem. Otherwise, it would have been even worse. For 6 months now, poor Aaron had been trying to read this damn book. He was one of the most stubborn dragons. The wolves crept dangerously close, trying not to make a sound so as not to catch the dragon's eye. But suddenly, the guys exchanged glances. They saw a piece of dragon scale. That was why they had come here. This thing was incredibly expensive on the black market. One of the wolves tiptoed closer and was about to take the treasure for himself, but suddenly something changed. The poor guy felt that everything around him was beginning to shake and rumble, as if the dragon had become angry again. Lifting their heads, the two wolves saw huge rocks falling from above. The two seekers froze in place, staring in horror, already resigned to their fate, and the dragon roared again. "Finally, I found it!" His eyes glowed bright yellow with joy, and he began to turn around. Due to its size, the dragon nearly destroyed the cave. Rocks began to fall from under its massive body. Aaron was about to destroy the cave. His thunderous laughter rang out. But finally, I found the dragon. He lowered his head and looked with his yellow eyes at the book in front of him. His toothy mouth stretched into a satisfied smile, and his pupils became vertical. But finally, it was the polymorph spell. He carefully held this tiny book with his huge fingers. On one of the pages was the spell I was looking for. It allowed me to change my appearance. Pausing for a couple of seconds, the dragon looked ahead and thought, well, now what? All that remained was to cast the spell, and everything would be ready. Meanwhile, the face of one of the werewolves appeared from under the rubble. The poor guy sighed heavily and finally got out. Thank God he was alive. Seeing such a monstrous spectacle, the werewolf decided to get out of there. Thank God they were alive at least, but it was time to leave. He didn't care about this shitty life anymore. After all, it was more valuable than 2 villages. They began to rush towards the cave exit. Meanwhile, the dragon began to chant a spell in his rumbling voice, and his body began to glow with a strange bluish light as he spoke the words. Finally, the huge monster opened its monstrous mouth full of sharp teeth and growled. The spell began to take effect. There was a loud bang from the ceiling, stones began to fall, and instead of the dragon, a small silhouette now more like a human lay on the solid ground. With great effort, Aaron finally got up. The boy now looked like a normal teenager, except with long hair. His yellow eyes opened, and they still had vertical pupils like a dragon's, but now the boy looked like a real human being. He examined his body. His tail had disappeared, as had his wings. This was completely new to him. Now Aaron looked completely different. It seemed to have worked. The boy clenched his fists and cried out with joy. Finally, everything had gone as it should have. All his efforts had not been in vain. He squinted and broke into a smile. Well, now he had to think about what to do in his new human body. The boy walked forward toward the exit. Finally, he got out of the cave and the sunlight hit his eyes. But Aaron didn't notice that he was already being followed. The boy walked along the ground wearing some kind of rag that served as his underwear. He didn't notice at all that someone had been following him from the very beginning. Not yet fully accustomed to his human body, Aaron felt thirsty after all. Everything has its nuances. The poor guy stuck out his tongue and breathed heavily. At some point, the boy sensed someone's presence and stopped, frozen in place. Someone was definitely following him. He heard a sound behind him, hurried footsteps getting closer and closer. Aaron stopped and looked back. In front of him stood several green creatures with muscular bodies, each carrying a heavy club. They were orcs or goblins. Aaron stopped, opened his mouth, and looked at them in surprise. It was the first time he had encountered such monsters in his new form. The orcs were getting closer and closer, and the poor little guy looked at them with surprised eyes, not knowing what to do with all of them. There were too many monsters. The poor thing froze in place. Damn, before, all it took was a sneeze to make them run away in fear. But now, what to do? I can't handle them. The little boy jumped back when the orcs moved straight towards him. There was real terror in the boy's eyes. He was truly confused and didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, the orcs were already approaching. There was a whole army of them, each wanting to get their hands on the boy and sell him. Finally, Aaron couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "You scoundrels! How dare you attack the red dragon? This is unacceptable!" Suddenly, a whistle sounded in the sky and dozens, maybe even hundreds of arrows flew straight at the monsters. The orcs began to fall one after another under this rain, and their cries could be heard, but it seemed that nothing helped. Aaron himself simply crawled back and watched in amazement as the arrows literally rained down from the sky. The boy was scared, but he still watched. Suddenly, a strange silhouette of a man with burning eyes appeared from somewhere. He immediately rushed at the monsters and began to destroy them one by one. The man moved with astonishing speed. The orcs didn't even have time to do anything before he destroyed them one by one. Finally, the man at the cloak stopped waving his sword one last time. The orcs were gone, completely destroyed. The man looked quite ordinary, with brown hair, the same cloak, and a stern, piercing gaze with which he looked at the boy. Frozen in place, Aaron couldn't move. Where did this man come from? It was good that he arrived in time, but who was he? Suddenly, one of the surviving orcs swung his club and struck the poor boy on the head, knocking him unconscious. The poor boy only had time to scream. The continent where the events took place was divided by a snow-covered mountain range, with snow caps and incredible frost everywhere. Somewhere deep here lived the oldest dragon, several thousand years old. Somewhere in the distance, among the magma and molten rock, a silhouette appeared, and a concerned voice was heard from somewhere. Before us stood a woman suspiciously similar to Arena. It was his mother, the oldest of all dragons. She looked sternly ahead and cried out, "Why did you give my son a magic book?" Suddenly, the lava began to boil, and a silhouette appeared from it. The woman did not move from her place but simply stared ahead with stern eyes. The oldest red dragon looked at her and smiled with his toothy mouth. "You little man, how dare you insult me?" The dragon's head appeared from the raging lava. "I just told him a children's fairy tale. Who could have known that he would take it seriously? He is a disgrace to our family." His mother flew into a rage. "What do you mean, disgrace? Say that again." She didn't particularly want her son to be insulted so directly. The elder dragon sighed. "This boy is the first who dared to leave our clan. He will definitely leave his mark on history. Rest assured." His mother continued to rage. "Are you laughing now, or is it just me? You're not even scared." The dragon smiled. "Fine. As soon as he shows up, I'll punish him for sure." The woman just snorted and looked at him with furious yellow eyes. She was clearly angry with her son, but now she was more concerned for his safety. She sighed quietly. "Of course, a dragon with dementia who does nothing but lie around in his cave. What else can you expect?" The elder flew into a rage. "Come on, repeat that." In the end, the elder flew into a rage. "You have no respect for your elders. Where is your subordination? It's the same as your son's. Insolent and shameless." But it seemed that the woman didn't care. She just stared at the dragon with furious eyes and wanted to find her son at all costs. Suddenly, they were interrupted by another man with the same fiery red hair who appeared from somewhere. "Hey guys, can you keep it down? What are you doing here?" The dragon looked at him with huge eyes. Standing before them was the king of the red dragons himself, smiling. But why did he come now? The man came closer and sighed. "Okay, what to do with this boy? I'll decide myself. Stop worrying so much." He exhaled and glanced to the side. "Although if Aaron himself comes, I will sense it, and there is nothing to fear. This is certainly an extraordinary case, but still." His mother continued to worry. "He's only 300 years old, he's just a child. Everything will be fine with him, I'm worried." Finally, she calmed down and just exhaled. "He's so vulnerable and the world is so cruel. The king smiled. Calm down, he'll be fine. He's an adult after all. You can trust me and calm down. This will never happen again. The woman looked at him imploringly and just sighed. The events moved to the trading city of Ryel. It stood on the banks of a large river, which allowed it to become a trading center for almost the entire continent. Here, ships filled with various goods plied the canals, and life flourished in the streets filled with people. It was one of the largest cities with a population of over 100,000, and it was located at the end of a mountain range. It was one of the most highly developed cities, and in total, there were more than 6 states on this continent. And so our little boy, having found some rags, stood in the middle of this huge city and couldn't come to his senses. It was the first time he had seen so many people in such a big city. His eyes bulged out of his head. It was so cool. Poor Aaron almost fainted from the excess of emotions. His eyes widened. This was the human world. Just think about it. Encountering a new civilization for the first time, the boy began to look at everything with genuine interest. Around him were stalls selling food and various goods. Behind him stood that mysterious man, just smiling like a nimble little guy, and he was funny. The man's name was Rake. He stood nearby and talked to his friend. The bald man was worried. Listen, he'll be fine. He doesn't remember anything. Smiling, Rake said in a mysterious tone, to be honest, I don't know, but first we need to find him a place to stay. Meanwhile, Aaron was walking around the city looking at everything around him. Everything here seemed new to him. The boy stopped near a grocery store and began to examine the products with eyes burning with interest. There were fruits, vegetables, and various food supplies. There were so many different people and houses here that his eyes darted around. Well, it was no surprise, as the boy was seeing the human world for the first time. He looked over at the grinding machine and the blacksmith's shop. There were so many different tools here that he had never even imagined existed. He would probably have continued looking at everything around him if Ryke hadn't approached him. Hey kid, finish up here and let's go. We need to go somewhere. The boy looked at him over his shoulder. Where are we going? His eyes showed genuine interest. He seemed to never tire of being surprised. Ryke smiled at him. Listen, you said you had nowhere to go. Well, I know a place where they can help you. The boy smiled. Really? The seeker looked at him with a mysterious and very unkind look and nodded. Yes, of course. Don't be afraid. In response, Aaron just flashed his eyes. Amnesia is a good thing after all. I don't remember anything and no one here knows me. Soon they entered a local tavern. It was noisy, with lots of people drinking and having fun. The air was thick with the smell of food and alcohol. Our hero stood on a small balcony and talked to someone while the rest of the people just had fun. The man, apparently the tavern owner, looked at the strange boy and said, So kid, you don't remember anything except your name, am I right? In response, Aaron just smiled broadly, showing his exceptionally white teeth, his cheeks slightly reddened. Rake stood nearby and looked at the man. Well, what do you think? The tavern owner looked at him. Excellent. I like it. Well then, follow me, Rake. I'll show you around. The man just flashed his eyes and looked at his interlocutor. Turning to Aaron, Rake just blinked. Listen, boy, stay here and guard my things. I'll be back soon. The boy stood there in complete bewilderment. He took a cup with some kind of drink from somewhere and began to drink through a straw. Apparently, he liked it. The boy closed his eyes and smiled, sighing heavily. How delicious it is. It turns out people drink such interesting drinks. Reika's bag was lying nearby, and our hero looked at it with genuine interest. There were some books in it. Well, if Reika isn't here, that means I can take a look at his things. Aaron picked up a book and began to study it with burning eyes. There was a lot of new and interesting stuff there. A map of the world, various monsters, a whole encyclopedia. He should read it. And then the boy noticed with genuine excitement that he could easily turn the pages with his new fingers. How convenient. Suddenly, he found an entry in the book about a big dragon that lived on a mountain ridge. It said that he was over 1,000 years old and was a dangerous monster. Seeing the note about himself, Aaron flew into a rage. That's me? Who wrote my age here? I'm not that old. He continued reading and was increasingly surprised. It said that about 20 years ago, the dragon had built a nest for himself. Wait, is he a bird or something? Seeing that he had burned down several cities and destroyed a bunch of people, Aaron just sighed, but there were no people nearby. And then he was surprised at the end. What does it mean that he controls dragons and other monsters? Actually, I just eat them, nothing more. And he is hostile towards people. The boy continued reading. It said that there was a reward of several tens of thousands of gold coins for him. And then suddenly, Ryke appeared. The boy looked up and closed the book. Listen, why did it take you so long? He looked at him with surprised and interested eyes. Ryke pointed behind him. Nothing special. I just asked my friend to help you. Don't be afraid, he's a good guy. Just behave yourself. The man leaned over and closed his eyes. Now you need time to restore your memory, don't you? Well, good luck. The adventurer looked at Aaron and smiled. The boy still didn't understand anything. So that's what it is. Thank you, kid. He smiled his sincere smile. He seemed incredibly naive and didn't understand what was going on at all. Stepping back, Reek just sighed. I have urgent business to attend to, so we'll have to part ways here, kid. You'll have to figure things out on your own from now on. Finally, the man smiled. But you see, I kept my promise. I told you I would bring you to the city. Looking at him with wide eyes, Aaron still didn't understand anything, but he didn't argue. The seeker turned around and waved goodbye, leaving the boy standing by the coffee table in complete bewilderment. Life went on, probably filled with shouting, someone drunk sleeping on the table, and the adventurer heading for the exit. Our hero had met this man about 10 days ago. Although they had traveled together for some time, the boy did not particularly regret their parting. What can I say? Aaron didn't worry about anything. He just sat and drank, thinking about how strange people are. Suddenly, the tavern owner appeared and called out to the boy in a rough voice, "Hey kid, come here!" The boy looked at him in surprise. "But I haven't finished my juice yet." The man paid no attention. Aaron just snorted and emptied his glass in one gulp, looking disapprovingly at the strange man, who now didn't seem so friendly. They went down the stairs and out onto the street. The boy asked where they were going, and the man snorted at the stock exchange. Aaron had no idea what that was and just raised an eyebrow, but probably thought it was some kind of big house. They walked down the dark night street. The tavern owner said, "Of course I bought you, but I don't have the money to keep a slave. You are strong and have a pretty face, so you can earn a lot." On the way, Aaron kept thinking about what a pretty face meant and what gold coins were. Maybe it was just something tasty. Finally, they approached a large building. The little boy looked at it with his huge yellow eyes. "Wow, what is this?" The fact is that slavery was prohibited by law in the empire, and you could go to prison for it. But here, in the state of Haida, slavery was permitted, so there should have been no problems with it. It flourished here. And in the city of Ryel, there was one of the largest exchanges, which was basically the largest in the country. The man tossed a heavy bag of gold coins and laughed, "Well, how lucky I am to have earned so much money." "Good luck," he said to his new owner, turned around, and walked away whistling a song under his breath. Meanwhile, Aaron was already sitting in some strange cell. He didn't understand anything. Everything around him seemed new, and even fun. The kid didn't understand what was going on here or what to do next. He was locked up in some strange place with bars everywhere. The poor boy sighed. If only Rake were here, he would surely explain everything, but there was no one here, so he would have to figure it out for himself. He heard voices behind him. Several other children of the same age approached him. One of them snorted, "I thought a girl had come to us, but it turns out you're a boy." Hearing the voices behind him, Aaron tensed his whole body and bit his tongue. Could there really be someone else here besides him? He was scared out of his wits, turned around, and started waving his arms. Who would have thought that such eyes would appear on a boy's forehead? The two guys exchanged glances and just sighed. "Calm down, it seems we're in the same boat. They tricked you too and stuck you in this hole." Looking at them with wide eyes, Aaron began to think. It seemed that these guys had been here before. They were about the same age as his own body. They sat down in a circle, and Aaron began to tell them about himself. Rake said he looked to be about 20, but the guys asked how long he had been in the slave trade. Aaron grabbed his head, sighed, and said he didn't remember anything. The previous man said he had amnesia. The two new acquaintances exchanged glances, their eyes widening at the word amnesia. They seemed either frightened or furious. Our hero just looked at them and smiled innocently. It seemed like he didn't understand a thing, and he even liked it that way. He didn't remember anything at all. The guy started asking him questions. "What do you know? Where are you from? What did you do before?" But Aaron just looked at them with a blank stare and couldn't remember anything. He just said he didn't know anything. That was it. The guys just looked at each other. Strange, of course, we have a new guy, but nothing. The boy with white hair smiled. "Okay, you can ask me. I'll tell you everything I know." Realizing that they seemed like good people, he just smiled and looked hopefully at his new acquaintances. They sat down in a circle and started talking. Their conversation lasted several hours, and Aaron learned a lot about this world. For example, about the local currency, which was gold coins. At first, he thought it was some kind of food, but it turned out to be a payment system. He listened intently, his eyes wide open. He also learned about the local government, the slave trade, and everything else. Finally realizing that he had simply been sold into slavery, Aaron was horrified and jumped up. "So you're saying that I was just sold?" The black-haired guy just exhaled. "So you only just realized that you were deceived? What a trusting young man you are." Hearing such unpleasant news, Aaron flew into a rage, gritting his teeth and his face becoming contorted with anger. That's why they took such good care of him. "Damn, Reek, you're a real jerk. That's why you cared so much about me. You just wanted to sell me for a higher price. So that's what people are like." The poor boy began to breathe heavily. His eyes bulged with surprise and shock, and he was so frightened that he simply froze in place like a statue. At some point, a monstrous idea came into the boy's head. Maybe he could turn into a dragon and destroy everything. Everything here seems to be going to hell, so it would be a good idea. But he immediately had to abandon this idea as soon as he thought about what his mother would do to him. She would probably lock him in his room for 400 years. The poor little boy had no idea what to do now. He just sat there, trembling with rage and fear. He finally calmed down and thought, if I turn into a dragon now, I'll probably never see the human world again. Watching all this, the two new acquaintances whispered to each other. It seemed that the boy was really in shock. They told him not to trust anyone. The boys exchanged glances and sighed. Well, it's too late to panic now. All we can do is pray that you'll be sold to good people. They started to get ready for bed. We've been talking for a long time. It's time to sleep. It's late. We'll discuss everything tomorrow. Don't worry so much. Aaron just looked at them and thought, okay, for now, I'll do what they say. They seem like good guys, but I definitely can't trust anyone. He had already started to crawl under some kind of rag. Okay, I'll wait until morning, and then when I find myself in a deserted place, I'll turn back into a dragon. He lay down on the cold concrete floor and continued to snort. Then I'll find the one who bought me, eat him, and turn back into a human. With thoughts of his brilliant plan, the boy fell asleep, smiling constantly. How clever I am. Everything should work out. A few weeks after Arena was sold, the day arrived. A large crowd gathered in the Great Hall, all wanting to buy slaves. The first contender was brought out. He was a shabby, poor herald who waved his arms and called out to buyers. Among all the slaves, there were even elves. They sat huddled together and looked with frightened eyes. They had heavy shackles around their necks. Almost all of the city's aristocracy had gathered in this hall. Rich people wanted to buy slaves at a good price, and their voices could be heard everywhere. Finally, our hero was brought out. Aaron walked forward, surrounded by several soldiers in armor, and there were also several slaves with him. The boy came out for everyone to see. He was a little scared, but he watched and listened with interest to what all these people were saying about him. Yes. The boy turned his head in search of any answers, but everywhere he looked, people were shouting. They seemed to be delighted with his appearance. Turning his head, the boy still couldn't understand anything. The people were very strange. What were they doing? Several aristocrats stood on the balcony, and shouts could be heard everywhere, each offering their own price, which increased with every passing second. But when someone offered 5,000 gold coins, everyone fell silent and turned their surprised heads to the side. There stood a man with a crooked smile on his face. He raised his hand. He didn't look very pleasant, and it was clear that his thoughts were not at all kind. But suddenly, his bid was outbid. It was a man standing nearby in a dark robe. He raised his hand and named his price. While the others haggled, Aaron just stood nearby and watched, listening to all the strange conversations. In the end, he began to get bored himself. God, someone buy me already. I don't care. Just let it all end. But suddenly, someone's hand shot up and named a fabulous sum of 10,000 gold coins. The hall instantly fell silent. This price was named by a man in shining white armor. He looked more like an angel, apparently some kind of knight from a noble family. The man who had initially offered the money froze in place and looked around with surprised and frightened eyes. The money was gone. It was Darius, the first knight of the kingdom, a nobleman and a very prominent figure in the state. Hearing this amount, Aaron looked at the strange man and opened his eyes wide. So it was this man in armor who bought me, yes. The knight approached, the crowd parted, and whispers and conversations could be heard everywhere. It seemed that people had recognized him as the man they called Silver Light. But what was he doing here? Darius walked forward and tried not to pay attention to the enthusiastic voices of the people. He simply closed his eyes. God, it seems they think something else about me. The man sighed heavily and approached. He felt terribly uncomfortable in such a situation. It's better to keep quiet. Aaron just looked at him with eyes full of interest and some hope that this damn auction would finally end. Stopping, the knight asked in a loud voice, "Well, does anyone else want to raise the bid? If not, I'll take the baby." No bids followed, and the knight handed over a heavy bag. "Here you are, all the payment in cash." Our hero stood nearby and just stared, his mouth closed. Looking at him, the knight sighed heavily. "Well, boy, now I am your master." Everyone fell silent for a few more seconds as they looked at each other. Finally, our hero left the auction hall, a smile spreading across his face. He was more happy that this circus was finally over. A carriage drawn by 2 horses was traveling at high speed through the city streets, with the knight himself riding in front. Sitting on his steed, Darius stared ahead with his piercing blue eyes and did not say a word. His face was serious and focused. At the same time, Aaron sat in the carriage with the other slaves who had also been bought at the auction, simply staring ahead in silence. When night began to fall on the surrounding area, the caravan stopped and they decided to set up camp. Soon, a small fire was lit and people began to take out their belongings. Aaron also sat in front of them. He was dressed in some strange clothes that looked more like a woman's dress, but the boy didn't seem to mind. People kept looking at him with strange eyes. The woman sitting next to him covered her mouth with her hand so as not to laugh. Meanwhile, our hero just sat and ate bread while the others whispered among themselves. Just think, in that dress he looks just like a princess. Our hero simply ignored them and ate the bun with great appetite. After all, at the exchange he was fed some kind of gruel, but here he finally had normal food. Starting to chew vigorously, Aaron thought, okay, they bought me. What next? Are they really going to keep transporting me in this cart? What are they going to do? They're strange people, after all. On the other hand, they seemed like nice people and were quite kind. They gave me new clothes, fed me, and kept me warm. Compared to what I had before, it was a gift. The boy looked at them sideways. Although they could turn out to be just as cunning as that Ryel and deceive me, so I should be a little more careful. Finally, Darius came closer and asked the chewing boy in a calm voice, "Listen, what's your name?" Distracted from his meal for a moment, Aaron raised his head and said his name loudly, breadcrumbs flying out of his mouth. The man came closer and leaned over. "Listen, kid, aren't you curious why we fed you and dressed you in such strange clothes?" The knight approached and placed his hands on the boy's shoulders. "You probably don't understand because you used to be a slave. Now I will explain everything to you, but don't be afraid." Aaron looked at him with surprised eyes. The man continued, "From this day forward, you will play the role of the princess of our state, Lady Ione." For a second, the whole camp fell silent, and even the people who were carrying things stopped and looked at the boy. Aaron asked, "So I have to pretend?" The knight was still holding the boy by the shoulders. "We are the knights of the kingdom of Karsel, whether you understand it or not." He looked at him kindly. "We are now heading to another kingdom, and unfortunately, Her Highness was unable to join us for certain reasons, and we didn't know what to do. But we found you." Aaron looked at them with surprised eyes and tried to figure out what this man wanted from him, while it was clear that he was now a princess. Finally, he understood and was even happy, but what luck. First, I was an ordinary slave, and now I've been promoted to princess. How quickly this world changes. Raising his head, Aaron looked at the knight and asked with interest, "Listen, who is your princess anyway?" The man grinned and said, "It doesn't matter. Just do what you're told. That's enough. If you just sit here." Aaron smiled, seeming to begin to understand. Looking at him, Darius smiled kindly. "For now, just sit here and rest. You're safe, kid. There's nothing to be afraid of." Finishing the conversation, the man turned around and quickly walked back to the others, his cloak billowing in the light breeze. Left alone with his thoughts, Aaron continued to chew his bread. "So, I just need to pretend to be a girl." "Yeah, that's easy enough." "Well, basically, they're like the knights of the kingdom. If something happens, I'll just turn into a dragon and eat everyone. Nothing complicated." Night fell, and our hero was still awake, sitting somewhere on the outskirts and looking at the starry sky, where a bright moon had already risen. He heard a voice behind him. It was the woman with the kind face. She was carrying some bedding. Looking at the boy, she asked, "Are you still awake? Tomorrow will be a difficult day, so you'd better get some rest." Aaron looked at her over his shoulder. "Good evening, ma'am." The woman smiled kindly and looked at him. "You can just call me Rice." Her eyes were kind. Hearing this, the boy just smiled and looked at her with inexpressible gratitude. This woman seemed very kind to him and seemed like a good person. He got up from his seat and came closer. "By the way, Rice, can I ask you something?" The woman turned around and nodded. "Of course." Aaron pointed at the knight. "Tell me about this man. Who is he and why did he buy me?" "This man's name is Darius von Goldbruff. At a young age, he became a knight of the royal family, and in a couple of years, he took the title of first knight in the kingdom. He is a very distinguished person. In a very short time, he defeated countless monsters and saved many people from disaster, for which he was nicknamed Silverlight." After hearing this wonderful story, our hero's eyes lit up with joy. So it was him who was described in those adventure books. They were now sitting in a tent at a small table. The housekeeper flinched slightly. "What are you talking about? Although anything is possible, it could have been him." The poor woman sighed heavily and put her hand to her forehead. "What kind of child is this? The whole world knows about our master, and only he is unaware." Meanwhile, Aaron just looked at her with kind eyes and prepared to listen to a new story. He was now incredibly interested. The woman continued, "Once, this brave lord even defeated the huge, mighty white dragon Gratesis, thereby earning the title of Dragon Slayer." Rice smiled. "Sir Darius, the most famous knight in our kingdom. How can you not know about him?" A smile appeared on the woman's face. Our hero thought for a moment. "A dragon slayer, you say? But I am a dragon myself." The boy's eyes widened in surprise. "So this man destroyed the dragon." He recalled the moment when the knight swung his sword and killed the huge monster. For a second, Aaron froze and began to think about what Karshutane had said. Now he understood and came face to face with his main enemy. The image of the elder dragon appeared before his eyes again, when he had raged about how humans were vain and vile creatures who would destroy anyone for their own benefit. The young dragon thought about it. The elder dragon had always been lazy, but as soon as he talked about the dragon slayer, he immediately became furious. The housekeeper rose from her seat and smiled, saying, "All right, enough chatter for today. Let's go to bed, it's late and tomorrow will be a difficult day." Aaron was still sitting at the table, thinking about this conversation and the story about the dragon slayer, which had made an incredible impression on him. The boy still couldn't understand how such a small man could destroy a huge dragon. But aren't they that strong? It was very interesting. The boy stood still and slammed his hands on the table, almost knocking it over. The decision came naturally. He jumped up and rushed out of the tent. Racist didn't even have time to say anything before our hero was already outside, eager to ask about his exploits. Running outside, Aaron rushed forward in search of the knight. He wanted to ask him personally about the feats he had accomplished in the past. Darius sat by the fire, thinking about something, his head bowed, just staring at the burning flames in which the wood crackled. The man flinched for a second when he heard someone's hurried footsteps approaching from behind him and immediately became alert. He glanced to the side and looked behind him with a surprised look. The knight was always ready to parry a blow, but so far he did not sense any danger. Aaron stood in front of him for a few seconds. The boy just stared at him with a lifeless gaze and then exclaimed, "Finally, I found you. You're still here, sir." Looking at him, the knight smiled wearily. "It's late, kid. Why aren't you asleep? Did something happen?" A smile spread across our hero's face, and he almost laughed and squinted with joy. Jumping up, Aaron ran to the knight, shouting, "Please tell me how you defeated the dragons, sir. I'm interested to hear." Darius briefly recounted his former exploits to the little boy who had suddenly become interested in his heroic past. These stories also featured the court sorcerer Gasto, who had helped him in his former exploits. There was also Pluto, the assistant to the court knights, who immediately rushed into battle shoulder to shoulder with the others, and the coolest fighter named Vera, who was probably the most legendary warrior of all. And there was also the big white dragon that their squad once fought. That was a really interesting story. Finishing his story, the knight looked at the stunned boy and said, "That's how our enemy went to the other world. Since then, we have been called dragon slayers." The man sighed heavily. "Well, to tell the truth, we were just lucky." The boy's body shivered from this story. It was already late. The knight stood up and sighed. "Look, it's already late. It's time for you to go to sleep, kid, or you won't get enough rest and will be as sleepy as a fly." Still under the impression, Aaron looked at the knight and nodded his head. He was both scared and interested to hear all this. Although at some point, the kid realized that he had wasted his time. Some white dragon wouldn't mock people. He would have stayed alive, and it would have been his own fault. At some point, a thought entered the little boy's head. "Listen, what if I myself am forced to fight people? Okay, I should be on my guard from now on." He got up, stretched, and sighed heavily. It was indeed late, and he had stayed up too long. It was time to go to sleep. The next day came incredibly quickly, and now the whole caravan was moving forward toward the gates of the kingdom. The carts moved along a country road, surrounded only by endless wastelands and dense forests, with not a single living soul except them. To the great surprise of all his companions, Aaron learned incredibly quickly, and the princess's outfit now fit him perfectly. They were all sitting at a small table with a pile of books. Now, there was only one problem to solve: how to change his voice, because Aaron was still a boy. The housekeeper sighed heavily. "I hope his voice will somehow improve upon arrival in the kingdom, otherwise it will be a big problem." At these words, Aaron thought with interest and some fear, "So people's voices change in that palace. I wonder what kind of place it is." Suddenly, someone's scream was heard outside. "And here we are. We have arrived in the capital." Everyone immediately turned and looked in that direction. Aaron went to the exit and pulled back the curtain, but the housekeeper tried to stop him. The carriage was still moving, and it was dangerous there, but the boys did not listen to her. The entire carriage drove up to the huge gates that seemed to rise up to the sky. This was the capital of the kingdom. They approached a large fort, behind which the roofs of houses were visible. There were so many of them that it was impossible to count them all. The capital was surrounded by high walls, and in the middle, the palace was visible. There were a striking number of people in the city. They went about their business, absorbed and paying no attention to anyone else. Everywhere there was the noise of human voices. Looking at all this, Arena's eyes shone with joy, while the housekeeper, having given up trying to reason with the child, simply sighed heavily. It was really beautiful here, with wide streets paved with cobblestones and neat houses on either side. It was not like that at all in the previous city. Finally, the carriage stopped and the knights began to unload their belongings. There was noise from voices everywhere, and it was even somewhat unfamiliar. The knight stopped, jumped off his horse, patted it on the side, and approached the royal palace. His face was serious and focused. It was clear that the man was accustomed to taking his work very seriously. The housekeeper followed him, along with Aaron. The boy peeked out from behind the woman's back and looked around with interest. They stood in front of the colossal palace, and the boy froze in his place and stared with wide eyes. The housekeeper said, "From now on, you will live here." But only for a moment. Our hero opened his mouth in surprise. He had never seen such beautiful buildings before. All he had ever lived in was a cave. They arrived at the kingdom's fortress. Inside, it was simply beautiful. Small fountains, neat streets, a courtyard, and lots of greenery. The housekeeper led the newly minted princess inside and explained the layout of the castle. "Okay, you can stay here for now," she said, pointing to a room. "For now, you just need to get used to the royal fortress." Aaron looked at the interior decoration with interest and some caution. "Try to remember everything well." The boy opened his eyes wide and carefully studied the layout of his new, very strange home. They stopped in front of a large room, elegantly furnished in the latest fashion. Everything here was incredibly elegant and beautiful. They approached the door, and the housekeeper said in a serious voice, "From today, you are no longer Aaron. You are a princess. Try to remember that well." The boy laughed, narrowed his eyes, and nodded his head. "Of course, we'll do everything." He even seemed to be somewhat amused by his new role. Seeing his reaction, the housekeeper was horrified. No, that's not right. I said you are now a princess, so behave accordingly." The boy froze in surprise and looked at her. "Are you serious? Is it really that bad? How do you think I should behave?" The woman continued to lecture him. "Remember, you are a princess and must behave like a princess. Do you understand?" For a second, Aaron froze, trying to process everything he had just heard. It was too complicated for him. He was not used to royal etiquette. But Rhesus seemed satisfied. The woman just sighed heavily and looked away. "Well, that's something." She turned and went about her business, saying one last thing. "Now rest before tomorrow, Your Highness," leaving the boy completely baffled. All this time, Aaron was trying to figure out what to do next. He just stood there and stared at the door of his room. A new life begins right here and right now. But his bewilderment was immediately replaced by excitement. So in the near future, he would be living in this beautiful place. Wow, that's so cool. Bursting into the room, Aaron froze. Everything around him was so beautiful that it even sparkled in the daylight. Wow, this is so cool. The boy clenched his hands into fists. There were only cool, incomprehensible things here. He was terribly interested in everything he saw and wanted to examine everything as quickly as possible. He approached the flower pot and began to touch the flowers with careful movements. And what is this cute creature? How beautiful. He stopped and suddenly looked up in surprise. A strange portrait hung in front of him. Looking closer, the boy realized that it was a girl. Judging by everything, it was the princess he was dressed up as. But this girl's face was exactly like his. Next to it hung a sign, apparently from one of her fans, with countless compliments. Aaron looked at the portrait. So that's who they dressed me up as. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Thinking that his food had arrived, the guy jumped up and ran to the exit. "Oh, I almost forgot. I have to behave properly." He deliberately raised his chin high, straightened up, and now really looked like a real princess, as elegant as one should look. "Come in, please," he said, standing up straight, deliberately using a formal voice and taking a deep breath. He snorted and looked at the door as it creaked open, and the silhouette of a girl appeared. Aaron was still standing in his place, watching. It was indeed another maid. She was dressed in a maid's uniform and had a kind face. Her aquamarine eyes smiled as she stepped forward and immediately smiled. "Wow, she looks just like a princess." After such a reaction, Aaron lost all his composure and looked at the strange woman in surprise. The maid immediately waved her hands. "Oh my, how absent-minded of me. My name is Mina. Nice to meet you. I was a maid to the princess and now I guess I'm yours." She immediately began to circle around our hero and examine every inch of him. Aaron felt very uncomfortable with such an abundance of attention. Wow, he doesn't even have hair on his legs. What smooth skin. The guy had no idea what he had done to deserve such close attention. He felt terribly uncomfortable. The maid continued to chatter at such a speed that her words merged together, and it was impossible to understand her. Finally, the poor guy cringed. "God, she's so clingy. How can you talk so much? When are you finally going to shut up? My head is spinning." With a heavy sigh, the maid looked at the already exhausted Aaron. "All right, I'll tell you a little bit." The maid winked. "Well, I'll be the only one serving you because I'm the only one who knows your little secret. After all, we don't want anyone to suspect a switch. Yes." She came closer and hugged the boy around the shoulders. "In other words, we'll always be together now." Aaron shuddered. "Oh, not that. You're the last thing I need." They froze like that for a few seconds. The boy didn't know where to start. He was already tired of this chatty young lady, but she didn't want to leave. Finally, Mina realized that she was talking too much and immediately apologized. "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. You just surprised me so much." She immediately moved towards the tray of food. "You must be hungry after your trip. Don't worry, you'll get a good bite to eat now. Help yourself." Under the lid was a whole baked chicken, its crispy skin glistening in the sun and looking incredibly appetizing. Aaron was immediately delighted by such a delightful sight and smell and almost choked on his saliva. But at last he would be fed properly. Seeing his reaction, the maid immediately broke into a sly smile, apparently pleased that her work had been appreciated. Well then, bon appetit. Without waiting for an invitation, Aaron immediately moved toward the table with the chicken, almost tripping several times along the way, and began to eat. Evening came. Aaron and his new friend walked through the countless corridors of this large castle, looking at everything. The boy turned his head in an attempt to understand how everything was arranged here. Everything seemed surprisingly new and unusual to him. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, lighting the way. Everything here was incredibly cozy. They moved deeper into the palace. The maid led him to some doors. Aaron stopped and looked ahead with surprised eyes. Is it here? She came closer and knocked on the massive wooden door with her knuckles. Nothing happened for several seconds, and they just stood there. The door suddenly opened with a slight creak, and the stern face of a man appeared, and his voice was heard. You're late. They went inside. Arena sat down at a small table surrounded by many books. It was most likely some kind of library. The man approached him and began whispering strange words. The maid stood rooted to the spot, looking ahead with a frightened gaze. Apparently, she didn't particularly want to see this, but she had no other choice. The wizard touched our hero's neck with his hands and began to cast a spell. The boy felt a strange energy spread throughout his body, unlike anything he had ever felt before. Everything around him began to rise, and a small whirlwind appeared, ruffling the boy's hair. Aaron stood rooted to the spot and simply watched what was happening. When it was over, the sorcerer looked at the boy and snorted, "Well, success. The spell worked perfectly." Aaron wanted to say something or curse, but suddenly something changed. He heard something he did not expect at all. His voice was much thinner than before. Aaron jumped up from his seat and grabbed his throat. "What have you done to me? Why is my voice so squeaky? Why am I talking like a girl?" The housekeeper standing nearby just clapped her hands. "Now he really does look like a lady." The maid looked at the sorcerer. "Mr. Gaster, thank you so much. You have helped us immensely." The sorcerer smiled, clearly pleased with his work. "Now this child is indistinguishable from a young princess. Everything worked out. You can rejoice." And the doors flew open and Rysis entered the room. The woman clapped her hands. "Sir, you are a genius. I heard that this spell is not easy to cast, but you succeeded." Behind the housekeeper stood the knight Pluto watching. The sorcerer smiled. "There's nothing complicated about it. You just have to remember the voice perfectly, that's all." Pluto just sighed and lowered his eyes. Apparently, the man was either tired or very dissatisfied. Finally, he snorted. "Yes, they are like two peas in a pod, completely indistinguishable. Where did you even find this man?" Meanwhile, Aaron looked around in surprise. Everything around him had changed completely, and he didn't feel like himself. The boy was a little scared, but he was also curious. He looked at the two men. "Wait, those are Gaster and Pluto, the ones Mr. Darius talked about. So they are the legendary dragon slayers." Finally, the boy couldn't take it anymore, jumped up from his seat, and shouted, "You are the two legendary assistants of Mr. Darius, right? Am I correct?" The maid standing behind him gasped in surprise. "Remember the palace etiquette? You must address them by their titles. Please call them sir." The two men exchanged glances and looked at the boy. "Are you talking to us now or what? How do you even know our names?" The sorcerer scratched his beard. "You said you knew nothing about our way of life, so how do you know our names, boy?" Aaron just smiled at them. "I heard it from Mr. Darius. He said that you destroyed the dragon together. That's so cool, right?" The wizard smiled. "Well, if he already told you, then you heard the most truthful version, didn't you?" The two men began to reminisce and tell how it all really happened, going into great detail. Meanwhile, our hero just watched the two of them. It seemed rather strange to him to remember such things, although it was clear that the men were not particularly happy about it. The sorcerer lowered his head and closed his eyes slightly. It was clear that he was a little out of sorts or upset about something. Mr. Pluto was also gloomy and kept looking away as he talked about how he had destroyed the dragon. Their mood discouraged the boy a little. It was strange because the older dragon had said that people destroyed them for wealth and glory. Wasn't that true? In the end, he decided to ask a question in a thin voice. The boy apologized for what he was about to ask and approached them. "Listen, aren't you proud that they call you dragon slayers? It's such an honorable title, isn't it?" The sorcerer looked at the boy and spread his arms. "Well, it depends on how you look at it. On the one hand, yes. But on the other, sometimes I can't even sleep because of it." Pluto, who was standing nearby, just snorted. "People think it's so easy. They should try meeting a dragon face to face at least once." The sorcerer closed his eyes, his voice trembling for a second. "According to stories, they are just some kind of mythical creatures, but it's hard to even imagine their size." "Listen, I'm starting to understand all this," Aaron began to slowly realize. It turns out that these two were really scared when they encountered the monster. By the way, I wonder where Mr. Darius is. The conversation ended, and our hero was already lying in his soft bed, thinking about whether he could live here a little longer or just run away, although at least it was cool here. The boy looked away. If I turn into a dragon in such a crowded place, my mother will immediately know where I am, and then I'll be in big trouble. He continued to lie on the bed, although, on the other hand, I'm fine now. We have to go to another kingdom. Well, if anything, I'll turn on the way. A week later, Aaron and the other knights set off for the neighboring kingdom, already equipped for the journey. They showed him a map of the entire continent, with each kingdom labeled, and the maid showed him the route they would take. Seeing that they were going around the mountains instead of through them, Aaron was surprised. But why make such a big detour when you can just go through the mountains? Min approached him and put on a serious face. We are going around because a great and terrible dragon lives in the mountains. Hearing her description, Aaron shuddered a little. What are you guys talking about? I'm not that bad. Am I really that terrible? But the maid continued. Because of this terrible dragon, many people have lost their lives. He simply incinerated them in the surrounding area. They say he turns everything that moves into coal. These stories were partly true. People really feared these mythical creatures. Hugging herself, the maid shuddered. And in general, anyone who goes in there is already in the next world, you could say. She fell silent for a second. The guy looked at her with surprised eyes. Girl, what are you talking about? Have you ever even seen a dragon? This is nonsense. He thought for a moment. I'm not really such a bad person. I mean, I'm a dragon, but you understand why people think of me as such a monster. Besides, being a dragon, Aaron rarely saw people nearby, so he turned into a human to learn more about this world. In the end, he decided to ask the question. Listen, Mina, you said that no one ever returned alive from a dragon, so how do you know his name? The girl thought for a couple of seconds and looked away. You know, you're right. She seemed to realize that she had been caught in a contradiction. But that's what everyone says. And that's what it says in the books. Why wouldn't I believe it? Aaron looked at her in surprise, his eyes wide. You're so trusting. He thought for a moment and shrank a little. It seems like they talk about him, but then again, maybe not. I'm not such a monster. He turned away and gritted his teeth. Come to think of it, it's even offensive. What kind of monster do you think I am? I haven't done anything wrong. They called me the most terrible dragon. Finally, having dealt with his emotions, the boy looked at her. Listen, does that book of yours mention the dragon Karshutane? The maid thought for a moment and looked at him with surprised eyes, as if remembering everything she had read so far. Yes, there really was such a thing. It was a terrible red dragon, the oldest of all, incredibly evil and never approaching people. In response, Aaron just sighed. Well, at least they didn't get anything wrong here. Basically, it's all true. The old man really is like that. He was still sitting in the carriage, wondering why there were such terrible rumors about him. He wasn't some kind of monster. How could anyone think that? The caravan moved forward, the carriage riding ahead, leaving columns of dust behind its wheels. It seemed they were almost there. Soon, the ships standing in the harbor came into view. The caravan arrived in the trading city, and from there they continued their journey to the kingdom by river. Once on the ship, Aaron looked with interest at a world that was completely new to him and stood near the railing gazing into the distance. How wonderful it was here! The boy's eyes shone with joy. Of course, the forest was not bad either, but this was a completely different experience. Water turned out to be much better. The ship picked up speed, cutting through the waves. Someone called the princess over. It's too windy out here. Let's go inside. Turning around, Aaron smiled. No, it's fine. I'm not cold here. On the contrary, it's so cool. A maid was standing nearby, shivering from the cold. She was frozen to the bone and tried to keep herself warm by wrapping her arms around herself. Actually, I'm cold here. How can you stand here? Finally resigning herself, the girl said, Let's go inside, please. Aaron just snorted. Fine, go if you want. The boy had not finished his thought when he heard a heavy splash behind him, as if something very large had surfaced. He froze for a couple of seconds. Turning his head, Aaron almost fell onto the deck in surprise. In front of him was a huge fish, almost as big as he was. Where did it come from? But it was so cool that the boy leaned over the side to get a better look at the strange creature. The sea surprised him more and more every time. Seeing the newly minted princess leaning over the side, the maid looked on in surprise and horror. She's going to fall overboard. The ship continued to pick up speed and moved along the riverbed. From there, the maid's cry was heard. Your Royal Highness, you're going to fall! Finally, in the evening, the ship docked at a small pier. It was the port of the kingdom of Batran, where they were headed. The sun was already sinking toward the horizon. When the last rays of the setting sun painted the sky a bright burgundy, Aaron, along with the maid and the rest of the squad of knights, descended onto the pier, where they were already waiting for them. All this time, our hero tried to behave as naturally as possible for a princess, not forgetting the lessons of palace etiquette. Taking their seats, they set off along the wide streets of the kingdom straight to the main palace. Instead of a carriage, they had a small cart. Aaron looked at everything around him with genuine interest. For him, it was a whole new city. A helpful concierge was waiting for them at the palace gates. The man bowed. "Of course, we are not as luxurious as your kingdom, but I hope you will enjoy your stay." The heavy doors closed behind them, and the concierge disappeared somewhere deep into the palace, leaving the guests in their new room. The decor here was not pretentious, but quite cozy. The bed was soft, the room was tidy and tastefully decorated, and it was clean and spacious, which was good. Our hero's eyes sparkled with joy. He already seemed to like it here. There were so many new and interesting things. Let's take a good look at everything. But he was immediately interrupted by a maid. "Your Royal Highness, please focus on your studies. You are in the capital, so you must know at least the basics." After these words, Aaron just shrugged. God, she ruined the whole mood. How much more can I take? You're so annoying, but there was no choice. Soon they were called to dinner, and our hero was already sitting in a comfortable chair in front of a large table laden with exquisite dishes. He had to learn palace and table etiquette. The guy tried to hold a small fork gracefully and eat as elegantly as possible. He deliberately snorted and wiped his mouth with a small napkin. God, what meticulous creatures people are. It's just food. Why all these formalities? You can just eat with your hands. Oh well, never mind. The main thing is that it's very tasty. Thinking about this, Aaron put another piece of fresh meat into his mouth. Suddenly, his meal was interrupted by a strange guy. He sat down next to him without invitation and said hello. "Good evening, ma'am." The guy bowed politely and introduced himself. His name was Kaslo, and he was the sole and first heir to this kingdom. It was a great honor for him to meet her. Unaccustomed to such courteous treatment, Aaron froze, still clutching his fork. "I'm eating here, by the way. Where did you come from, you annoying kid?" But he tried to be as polite as possible and greeted him back, even though deep down he was begging this strange kid to get lost. But as luck would have it, his new acquaintance turned out to be a terribly clingy lady. "If you have already had dinner, I would like to talk to you in a more secluded place." Of course, Aaron wasn't full yet. His dragon appetite was much greater than a human's. "But I haven't finished eating yet," the maid cried out from somewhere behind them. The poor guy immediately felt a quick but very strong push under his ribs. But he could have said it more gently. Why start a fight right away? Or at least she could have cut her nails. This maid had amazing claws just like a dragon. God, people are scary. Putting on a deliberately good-natured face, the maid said, "You're just in time. We're finishing up now. Of course you can talk." Alone. Aaron just looked at her with a furious gaze, gnashing his teeth. Damn. Even today he didn't have time to eat properly because of this brat. The prince, seemingly unaware of anything, just looked lovingly at his new acquaintance. "You'll be very surprised when you learn her little secret." With great displeasure, Aaron followed the clingy prince, and now they were standing on the balcony talking. Kaslo talked about the geopolitical situation and said that there was actually a big gap between the kingdoms. For example, Arsnana had very strong weapons. He continued to talk incessantly, while our hero tried to act like a polite princess, even though he was very tired of listening to this whole tirade. Worse still, a maid was watching him intently from behind and wouldn't even let him move. That was really annoying. The prince continued, and in the end, he thought that their kingdom had high hopes for this meeting. Aaron did not object and only hoped that he had answered correctly. The prince looked at him and smiled. "It turns out that the fate of the alliance depends solely on your state." "That's right, isn't it? But since you, princess, have come here, I believe we have nothing to worry about." The guy looked at him with surprised eyes. But he still answered in the affirmative. The maid clenched her fists and narrowed her eyes. "Excellent, Aaron, keep it up. It was not in vain that I taught you." The prince continued to chatter. "Does this mean that the rumor about the unification of the two states can be considered invalid? Besides, our kingdom is located between the two states." The prince looked and smiled. Our hero had no idea how to respond. Kaslo continued to talk. He initially believed that it would be foolish to convene a council based on such unconfirmed rumors. All this time, Aaron just stood there and remained silent. He tried to play the role of the princess and kept his mouth shut so as not to say anything unnecessary. Although inside he felt terribly uncomfortable. This kid talks too much and I'm silent all the time. Maybe he thinks that Aaron is uneducated and can only speak in memorized phrases. Finally finishing his monologue, the prince looked at him. "It seems to me, madame, that you have too few guards." Aaron looked at him in surprise. "Is that so?" he sighed. "We live near dense forests where you can encounter monsters. And you have so little security. Aren't you afraid?" In response, Aaron just shrugged. "Not enough, yes, but so what? What answer do you want to hear from me? What am I supposed to say?" Just then a maid interrupted the conversation. "Your Highness, it's getting dark and the air is getting cold. Please come inside." This time, Aaron was genuinely glad of the woman's intervention and, saying goodbye to the prince, quickly retreated inside. But the prince did not want to be left behind. He even wanted to accompany the young lady. After all, I have several hundred first-class fighters at my disposal, and I myself am quite strong. The maid and our hero stopped when they saw the coat of arms on his sword. It was an engraving of a lion, which only the Order of Knights had. The housekeeper looked at the boy with a piercing gaze. Such a coat of arms is given only to extraordinary fighters. They must be strong and very brave. It turns out that this guy is not so simple. Caslow constantly hung around Aaron. It's clear why he offers his help. It seems he's fallen in love, or something worse. The fact is that their own kingdom of Carcel is considered the most economically stable at the moment. Therefore, although the kingdom itself is not a threat, it is still… What is this dandy's purpose in trying to get close to the princess? A terrible thought crossed the maid's mind. If it's a marriage proposal, it couldn't be worse. Deciding to end this pointless conversation, the maids intervened. "We are, of course, immensely grateful to you, but we are not as weak as your royal highness." The woman smiled. "Yes, I understand perfectly well that there is only one knight in our delegation, and his name is Pluto." Hearing this name, the young prince froze for a couple of seconds. His eyes widened in surprise, and the boy didn't even seem to know what to say. Then he exclaimed in surprise, "Are you talking about the very dragon slayer of legend?" It turned out that the legendary Pluto had indeed come with them, accompanied by the young princess, and was standing guard somewhere nearby. The next day, they set off for the capital. Our hero still had a long and very exhausting journey ahead of him. He was already sitting in the carriage. The boy leaned against the glass and pressed his nose against it, looking at everything around him. The housekeeper tried to reason with him, but it was useless. How boring! Adventure books told stories about monsters and brave knights, but here there was nothing but endless forest. And then there was that annoying guy. Were all these stories just lies? So far, apart from endless conversations, Aaron had seen nothing. He moved away from the window and looked at the maid with an irritated look. Mina, as if not noticing any of this, said, "Let's sit down and get comfortable." Sitting down on a small sofa, Aaron snorted, "How strange. You said there were many monsters here, but so far I haven't seen a single one. Only an endless forest." He made it. Raising her finger, the maid said meaningfully, "That's right, because we are protected by the brave knights. There are more than 400 of them. Would any monster dare to approach such a huge army? So you don't need to worry." However, our hero was more upset. How boring it is to just sit in a carriage and look at the forest. He even almost fainted. It's just unbearable. Seeing the guy lean back, the maid screamed and rushed to him. Aaron collapsed on the soft sofa and the maid continued to wail, "Sit up straight, someone might see you." But the guy was only interested in one thing. Where was the adventure? Finally, when night fell, the group set up camp somewhere nearby on a small hill where several tents were already standing. Seizing the moment, the young prince talked to Pluto and asked him all about his past exploits. The man tried to be polite and told him everything. Castle constantly chattered, "I heard that the brave knight Pluto struck the dragon right in the head with one blow." The experienced fighter just sighed. "My God, has that damn rumor reached you too? Oh, that gossip, how much more can I take?" The man sighed heavily, tipped a bottle of some drink into his mouth and tried to control himself. But inside, he was very angry. "If you're already spreading rumors about me, then why am I not the main character in this story?" The prince just looked at him with surprised and bewildered eyes. Maybe he could tell him a little bit after all, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. In the end, the man sighed heavily and waved his hand. "You are too generous, your highness. My skill with the sword is not that high." But the boy did not stop. "You are only 27 years old. I hope that I can be as strong as you." Pluto just glanced at him. It was very unpleasant for him to talk about it. Envy tormented the man. He wanted to be the main character. When the young man asked about sword skills, the experienced hunter said it was nothing special, more like an innate ability. Besides, Darius is better than me at everything. The young prince couldn't believe his ears and just cried out, "Is it true? Is this man stronger than you? You are probably the strongest people in the world." The knight lowered his head. He was already quite tired. Out of pure politeness, he couldn't end the conversation. "If you train hard, your highness, you will become the same. But unfortunately, there is one thing." Hearing this, the prince became alert and began to listen incredibly attentively. The man came closer and began to whisper, "No matter how strong we think we are compared to a dragon, we are just small insects, that's all." He turned and walked away into the depths of the camp. Everything around him was going on as usual, and the atmosphere was peaceful. A few meters away, Pluto and the maid were talking. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but something was bothering the woman. She asked, "Are you sure Aaron really needs to be at this meeting? He has no connection to our family." The experienced fighter just remained silent and looked into the distance. His expression showed that it was difficult for him to talk about it. This guy is just a slave. While the two were talking, our hero was just lying quietly in his bed snoring. He was very tired from this exhausting conversation and wanted to rest. Soon, the entire motorcade approached the capital of Arcanas. It was a large city surrounded by defensive walls to protect it from local monsters. The royal motorcade moved along the main street, everyone stepping aside before it and looking at the new arrivals with awe. Among them was Pluto, who, along with the others, looked ahead with a stern gaze and studied the situation like a true soldier. Our hero was also there, looking with surprise and interest through the carriage window at the new kingdom. Soon they arrived at the main palace, where the king himself was waiting to greet them. Everywhere there were exquisite dishes and beautiful decorations. Once again, assuming the role of Princess Erin, he approached and, lifting the hem of his dress, introduced himself. "At your service, your majesty." Standing before her was King Zaytrell, an elderly man with a kind but foolish face and narrowed eyes. "Welcome, princess. Just a few years ago, you were just a little girl, and now you have become a beautiful young woman." Erin politely inquired, "How is your health?" A maid stood nearby in the crowd, looking at her charge with admiration, as if she were her own child. "Even the king cannot tell you apart. Excellent work." Next was the young Prince Castle. He politely introduced himself. "At your service, your majesty." The king bowed kindly. Pluto crept up behind the king unnoticed and introduced himself in a loud voice. The king was even a little frightened by such force. Erin watched all this from the sidelines, simply looking and wondering what kind of people they were. But that's how dragon slayers are welcomed. Seeing how the king looked at this knight, the young man wondered if they were truly world-famous celebrities. Hearing that dinner would soon be served, our hero licked his lips. "Great, at least we'll get something to eat," but the maid immediately stopped him. "Wait a minute, your highness. The heirs of the other kingdoms have also arrived. Would you like to greet them?" Several noblemen were already standing there. The guy looked at this maid imploringly. "Listen, maybe we can eat first," but Mina was adamant. "This is more important, your highness." Our hero had no choice but to agree, sighing heavily. "God, it's so hard to be a princess. I'm already exhausted and it's not even over yet." Meanwhile, the balls continued, and he had to socialize with all these sheaves. It was incredibly difficult. The voices of the aristocrats could be heard from the window. Meanwhile, the king sat in his office, holding a glass of fragrant wine in his hands, reasoning that the meeting could already be considered over. The main topic of this feast was the union of two powers, and the king was seriously concerned about this event. The man sat and thought pensively. However, the personal appearance of representatives of these two states speaks for itself. He was talking about our hero and some other prince. The man took a few sips of expensive wine. If these states had indeed sent their only heirs here, then that meant something. Of course, I was nervous for nothing. The man exhaled heavily when suddenly a guard entered his office without even knocking and exclaimed, "Your Majesty, I have news for you. A warrior from the southern border has arrived." The king looked at him with surprise. Something has already happened. The guard was very discouraged and frightened. The man breathed heavily and tried to pull himself together, but his face betrayed his fear. Hearing that the army of the kingdom of Carcel, his army of many thousands, had attacked our own states, the king was horrified. He couldn't take it and cried out. The glass slipped from his hands and fell to the ground, breaking and spilling wine all over the floor. With a voice trembling with fear, the king demanded a more detailed report. What was the situation? What was going on there? It seemed he was completely unaware. Falling to his knees, the soldier began to recount the events, gasping for breath. They were attacked across the mountain range. It seems that Mr. Darius is leading them. The king cried out at this news. It was unthinkable. It couldn't be true. The man still couldn't come to terms with the situation. How could this man have done such a thing? The soldier shouted, "We don't know all the details, but we know for sure that the army came from there." The king froze and stared ahead with wide eyes, unable to believe what had happened. What was going on here at all? Overwhelmed by emotion, the man fell to the ground and seemed to lose consciousness. All that remained around him was a puddle from a broken glass and shards of glass. Meanwhile, on a small slope, a man in a dark cloak stood watching the city at night. He was like a shadow. It was too easy. It was a sorcerer named Gastor. Behind him appeared the White Knight himself. We staged an attack so that we would not encounter any unforeseen problems. That's right, the surprise attack was a success. Two men stood on the slope and watched what was happening. So far, it was a one-sided battle. The knight looked at him and snorted. There was nothing to be done. These were the rules of battle. The interests of our state were more important than the lives of soldiers. The outcome of this battle was known from the very beginning. The sorcerer watched and remained silent. He saw how his kingdom's army was crushing the enemy. Meanwhile, the soldiers stormed into the main hall and began to destroy everything in their path. A real massacre began. Arrows whistled everywhere, and the cries of people could be heard. The enemy was taken by surprise and could do nothing. Several archers, led by sorcerers, struck one after another. There was a roar in the air, and the smell of gunpowder filled the air. A real massacre began. People lay unconscious on the ground, some already dead. The main gate was about to collapse. Several sorcerers in dark robes helped the soldiers with their spells. They cast spells every second. It was a real hail of magical shots. Seeing that the battle was dragging on too long, the knight said, "We must defeat them, otherwise it will be tedious if it drags on too long." The sorcerer smiled. "Since ancient times, it has been my duty to raise the morale of soldiers. In other words, here's the thing. They were still standing on a small hill, watching from above. In order to defeat the enemy, they must first destroy their sorcerers." That's right. Below, several knights stood ready for battle, advancing toward the kingdom's main palace and preparing to break down the gates. The men argued that getting too close would be dangerous, but long-range magic could also affect our soldiers, so we need to think carefully. In response, only the sorcerer laughed. "My magic will reach from here, so don't worry and just watch carefully." The man took up a fighting stance and cast his most powerful spell. A magic circle appeared around him, flooding everything with bright yellow light. They stood on the mountain. The sorcerer continued to cast his spell. The more you use magic, the more you understand how destructive it can be. The enemy sorcerers froze in place, unable to believe what they were seeing for the first time in their lives. They had never seen such powerful magic before. It was incredible. The wizards were destroyed. The soldiers broke under the enemy's onslaught. The gates were about to collapse, opening the entrance to the main arena. Watching all this from the sidelines, Darius smiled. "This is just great. But could your spell work from such a distance?" Hearing the affirmative answer, the experienced knight couldn't believe his ears. "That's just incredible. I've heard that such powerful spells usually have a small radius of action." The experienced wizard laughed. "On the contrary, this spell is designed for long distances. This is only the first circle." They were still standing on the mountain, watching their enemy's castle crumble with every passing second. It was a terrifying sight. The sorcerer looked at his companion. "See, dear, this spell causes itching all over the body. Isn't that cool?" Darius froze for a couple of seconds when he heard this and couldn't think of anything to say. It was surprising and, at the same time, silly. The man spread his arms and came closer. "Listen, are you sure? Itching? That sounds silly." But the wizard smiled. "That's right, my dear friend. When your whole body itches, it becomes more and more difficult to cast spells, so the enemy mages are now completely powerless." The knight just exhaled. "That sounds like you, Mergastor. Well, since we've gotten rid of the wizards, that means the job is done." And yet, there is something else. The man looked away as if something had caught his attention. The battlefield was a real nightmare. Soldiers were running in all directions, trying to save their lives. The enemy was broken, and they had no way out. The sorcerer watched from the sidelines and smiled. He was very pleased with his work. The enemies were scattering in different directions. We had almost won. The thing is, a magic circle is a unit that measures the power of magic. The first one, as you understand, is the weakest. The wizard has to concentrate and transfer his energy into a kind of magic circle using mana, then he will be able to cast spells. In the end, the enemy army was broken, and Carcel's troops, who had surrounded the castle on all sides, prepared for night combat and had already set up camp. The knight looked at the sorcerer. "Listen, we have to capture the main castle tonight. Do you happen to have any other spells like the one you used?" The wizard just sighed heavily, as if a little offended. "This isn't some kind of toy. It's really powerful magic." The man spread his arms. "Listen, do you really think that if I'm a wizard, I'm close to God? No, if it were that simple, everyone would be a wizard." However, the knight did not stop. "What about magic? You can instill fear in people just by scaring them. Now we are much closer to our goal." The sorcerer looked closely at the second circle spell. It was the limit for this distance. "And besides, there are still a lot of them," said the knight. "I'm not asking you to destroy people, just isolate them so they can't fight. You were able to pull this off with the first circle, right? Let's forget about the fourth. Is there really nothing simpler that can help?" Gastor just remained silent, lowered his head, and closed his eyes. He was either annoyed or very interested. You see, the problem is this. The higher the magic circle, the more difficult it is to create a spell. You must be well aware of that. Even for me, a powerful sorcerer, it's not that easy. All magic spells were created in ancient times. This curse worked so well because the enemy encountered it for the first time and still has no countermeasure. That's why. The knight looked intently at the sorcerer, who continued, "If we use this spell constantly, they will figure it out and the effect will disappear in a few seconds. That's what you call luck." Gaster switched to a whisper, "So don't expect us to be able to repeat it again. Don't be so cocky." "Okay, let's move on to the night attack. I wonder if there's any way to destroy these gates. They're pretty sturdy after all." The sorcerer just smiled, hiding in his cloak. "After all, they call me the Dragon Slayer. Did you forget? And do you really expect anything else from a man with such a title?" The man waved his hand and ordered 2 soldiers to go after Jarn and Russell. "I need them." The soldiers immediately disappeared outside the tent. The knight, who didn't understand anything, just watched all this and didn't even dare to ask a question. The sorcerer threw on his cloak and said, "Wait, my dear friend. I will go and find a suitable spell." The man was already moving toward the exit. Two men were already waiting for him at the exit of the tent. "You wanted to see us, master, correct? We arrived at your command." The high sorcerer looked at his students. "Come here, boys. It's time to show what you've learned during this time." Two men stood before him. They exchanged glances. It was Jernan and Russell. They looked at their teacher in surprise. Could it be? Russell just snorted. "You have a good sense of humor, sir, I have no doubt about that," but the sorcerer just snorted. The second student looked at him with serious eyes. "Have you forgotten that our master never jokes? Isn't the role of wizards to raise the morale of soldiers?" Russell looked at him. "Yes, I understand perfectly well, but have you ever thought about the fact that you need to use spells?" Finally, the teacher couldn't take it anymore. "Shut up, both of you. What's the point of practicing magic if you're not going to use it?" He looked at Darius. "Well, are you ready to attack or not?" The knight shuddered slightly and looked at him. "Of course I'm ready," the man replied without a shadow of a doubt. "I've already given the order to the lieutenant. He'll let us know as soon as you break down the gate." The sorcerer turned and looked sternly at his two students. The man just snorted and got ready. The boys stood before him, trembling with surprise. "All right, let's begin," Gastor bellowed at the top of his lungs. And so, the three sorcerers stood in a row and recited a spell. The chief sorcerer cast a levitation spell. In less than a couple of seconds, the man soared into the air like a bird and, still holding his hands ready, continued to recite spells in an unknown language. The students huddled close to him, their eyes trembling as they stared ahead. Apparently, this was their first time. The enemy army, already in disarray, suddenly saw someone flying in the air in front of them. There was a silhouette. Two guards exchanged glances and realized with horror that it was the famous wizard Gastor, the Dragon Slayer, and what to do now? They continued to cast spells, uttering incomprehensible incantations that echoed throughout the area. The wizard, suspended in the air, stretched his arms forward, and incredible energy concentrated around his body, spreading out in electric currents. The man's eyes lit up, his face completely changed, and he now looked like a real monster, his voice becoming much lower. "Let this energy pour into my crushing arrow." The man spread his arms wide and cast the most powerful spell. He launched a huge flurry of magic arrows straight at the fortress. Several magic circles appeared in front of him, and a monstrous roar was heard. The soldiers in the enemy camp could not believe their eyes. Now, they would be struck by such a powerful spell. People were already clutching their heads in fear. A monstrous roar sounded, and the sturdy wall built for defense was broken in an instant, leaving a huge hole in its place. The path was now open. The commander of the invading army raised his hand with his sword and shouted, "The way is open! Advance immediately!" Well, that's the end of it. The sorcerer smiled, clearly pleased with the effect he had produced, and turned away, disappearing into the darkness, throwing a cloak over himself. Coming face to face with Darius, the man smiled and asked, "Well, how do you like my little performance?" The knight didn't even know what to say. He was stunned. It turned out that two students were responsible for the special effects to make it more spectacular. The man smiled. "I even got the role of the wall destroyer. Isn't that cool?" He had to admit that joint magic works wonders. The knight just sighed. "Well, the main thing is that everything worked out." The sorcerer continued to rejoice. "Isn't it wonderful? There's not a trace left of their wall. Now we can capture the city." The knight just nodded. Yes, that's right." The blonde knight looked at the sorcerer. "You really are like an archmage, sir. Your magic is truly impressive." Turning away, Gastor hid his face in his hood. "Unfortunately, I can't say that it's all thanks to my magical abilities." He took a small amulet with a red stone, similar to a ruby, out of his pocket. This thing also played an important role. Seeing this, even an experienced fighter froze for a couple of seconds and opened his eyes wider to get a better look. The two students froze in place, unable to believe what they had seen, and cried out in unison, "But that's the dragon's heart!" The terrifying white dragon they had defeated long ago reappeared before their eyes, its white eyes and sharp teeth still inspiring fear. The fact is that humanity has a very good attitude towards dragons, but only towards those that are not alive, as they are considered prey. Dragon bones are a good material for making high-quality weapons. Their scales and skin make excellent durable armor that cannot be pierced by arrows or blades. Roughly speaking, they are expendable materials. But among all these things, the most valuable is always the dragon's heart. One can only dream of such a thing. The dragon's heart contains its countless mana, which can be used for high-quality spells. The sorcerer looked at Darius. "All this is thanks to you. It's hard to imagine that there could be a dragon even more unlucky than the last one." Even the white-haired knight agreed that we were just lucky that time. We won't get another chance like that again. In the end, a white flag appeared on the ruined wall. The enemy finally admitted defeat and could no longer resist such an onslaught. The alliance existed for more than 300 years, until Carcel's troops took control of the main fortress and managed to completely capture the southern part. Meanwhile, our hero lay peacefully in his cozy bed and wondered how long he would have to remain in a human body. The boy just snorted because he had come here to enjoy adventures and all the delights of human life, but all he did was get bored. On the other hand, the food here was delicious, and that was the main thing you needed to be happy, right? Suddenly, a strange sound like a rumble came from the street. At first, the boy didn't pay much attention to it, but then the room shook violently. He immediately jumped up from his seat and began to look around to see what the sound was and what was happening. The boy was frightened and surprised at the same time. He jumped up, ran out of the room in his nightshirt, and ran away to find out what had happened. Looking out the window, Aaron was horrified. The whole city was engulfed in flames. There was a monstrous fire engulfing houses and streets. The boy screamed and called to the maid, "Come here quickly and see what's going on here." He turned around and didn't notice a strange silhouette creeping up behind him. It was definitely not Mina. Instead of the friendly maid who was always chatting, now a completely different girl was standing in front of the boy, with only her eyes familiar. The poor boy was frightened and began to back away, looking ahead with frightened eyes, wondering what had happened. The woman's voice had also changed, becoming harsher and sharper. The stranger was getting closer and closer. Aaron tried to move away, but there was only a window behind him. No matter how you look at it, Mina looks completely different. Who is this woman anyway? She leaned over and looked at our hero. The child still couldn't understand what the problem was, what had happened, why the former maid was behaving this way, and why there were flames outside. The woman looked at him with a softer gaze now, showing some pity and grief. "Forgive me, Aaron." The boy didn't understand anything and opened his eyes even wider. "What are you apologizing for?" He still couldn't understand what was going on. Waving her arms, the strange woman began to cast a spell. A sphere of energy appeared above her, and she directed the spell straight at the child. Still not understanding anything, Aaron screamed and tried to find out what was happening. Strange energy ropes began to swirl around him. In less than a couple of seconds, the poor boy found himself bound and unable to move even a finger. He cried out in surprise and began to rise upward. The woman waved her arms and cast spells. Poor Aaron tried to understand what was happening and at least find out what it was. Wait a minute. He didn't even have time to say a few words before he felt himself being carried away somewhere very far, gradually picking up speed. Soon, there was a crash. Still tied up, the guy broke the window with his body and flew out, right into the middle of all the chaos. The woman approached the broken window and looked after him. There was no need to take this man's life with her own hands. In any case, he would not be able to escape from here alive. The woman looked after him with some sadness, but then the mask reappeared on her face. Meanwhile, our hero was flying headlong straight down, screaming in fear. He didn't understand anything and found himself in a strange situation. Bound by some kind of magic, he flew straight into a burning house that stood nearby, surrounded by a real nightmare. The guards did not understand anything. The bodies of their fallen comrades lay around them, and the air smelled of blood and gunpowder. The palace was a living hell. Pluto stood with his accomplices, now in the main hall of the castle, having destroyed the royal guard. Smiling, the man said, "After all, a knight must always follow his code, be completely loyal to his king. Isn't that so?" The king flew into a rage. "That can't be. Do you think my old comrade would betray us so easily and turn against me? That's just nonsense." Pluto's voice was heard. He smiled and said, "It may well be, Your Majesty. You yourself do not rule out such a possibility, but you do not want to believe it." The man smiled a predatory smile. "And now I ask you to say goodbye to life, and if you wish, say your last word." The sword in his hands began to glow with a bright blue light. The king began to retreat and read in a trembling voice, "How dare you?" His face was filled with pure terror. The man understood that he could do nothing against him and only stepped back. Pluto was already raising his sword above the unfortunate king's head when suddenly there was a crash behind them, as if someone had fallen. The knight paused for a couple of seconds and turned his head to the side. At the last moment, he noticed several fireballs flying towards him. The man covered himself with his hands in an attempt to move away, but the fireballs began to hit him directly, and several monstrous shots were heard. The king himself stepped back, unable to believe what had happened. The entire castle was shaken by a monstrous explosion, and the man closed his eyes. Before them stood a middle-aged man with white hair. His name was Zapiel. He was the royal sorcerer who had managed to survive and had come to the aid of his majesty. He rushed forward to his king, surrounded by the other guards. "My God, what luck! We thought it was too late, Your Majesty." The king, still in shock, thanked his sorcerer with a trembling voice. But they had to leave immediately. The sorcerer grabbed the king by the shoulders and tried to lead him away. The east and west towers were already burning. This was the work of the messengers. But suddenly, a voice was heard from somewhere. Everyone stopped for a second. Everything fell silent, and only the crackling of burning furniture broke the silence. The sorcerer and the king froze in their places and slowly turned their heads toward the source of the noise. It was Pluto's voice. The man had survived the monstrous explosion after all. His silhouette was visible in the fire. "You said goodbye to me too quickly, didn't you?" The man swung his sword and dispelled the fire with a single blow. He was safe and sound, his armor glistening in the light of the fire. How was this even possible? How did he survive a direct hit from a fireball? Everyone began to retreat from the raging night. Pluto grinned. "You're right. The projectile hit its target, but I prefer to use weapons and armor of the highest quality, so you've lost." In the end, the guards began to realize that chainmail made of dragon scales meant that magic had no effect on it, but how was that even possible? The sorcerer was horrified, but even if it was dragon scale, it was simply impossible. It couldn't withstand a direct hit from a spell. Pluto smiled. "You're wrong. These are white dragon scales, and they're different from the rest. They're much stronger than anything else." Suddenly, several more guards burst in. They shouted, immediately throwing down their weapons. "His Highness is fine." "Oops, it seems they've come for me." The man smiled and turned to the other soldiers, his quiet laughter audible. "The king has matured a little, of course, Pluto. I understand that you once destroyed a dragon, but the question is, can you handle so many soldiers and a wizard here too?" The man smiled slightly. "You see, it would be easy for me to deal with all of you on my own. You can be sure of that, but I didn't say I came alone." The king and the wizard stepped back, and genuine horror appeared on their faces when the ceiling began to crack. Looking up, they saw that the ceiling was indeed beginning to collapse. They had to leave immediately. Only Pluto stood motionless, as if waiting for the large stone blocks to fall to the ground, as if he knew he would remain unharmed. Finally, the girl who had pretended to be a kind servant appeared on one of the stones and climbed down. Looking at her, Pluto just snorted. "You're late, you know." His friend just snorted back, "By the way, I came just in time." A muffled cry was heard from behind, and the girl turned her head toward where the king should have been lying. The man was lying under a large stone slab that had fallen from the ceiling. He was still conscious but barely breathing. He was a tough nut to crack. The woman leaned over. "I suppose it's time to introduce myself. I'm not a servant. I'm a shaman named Vera. Pleased to meet you." The woman just smiled. "Yes, that's right. The legendary dragon slayer who together with the brave knights defeated the white monster." The king cleared his throat. "Are you saying that you simply dressed up as a servant? Could it be that the young princess is also in danger?" The woman's mouth stretched into a predatory smile. "Of course it was all just a ruse. I played my role well." She opened her hand, and a dark energy similar to ash began to appear there. "You are too confident, Your Majesty. Well now, have a pleasant journey to the other world." The woman smiled and looked at the king with kind eyes, but there was not a shred of compassion in them. Pluto smiled too. He was the last king of this state, which meant that nothing would stand in our way anymore. The man was clearly pleased. The king, barely alive, tried to cope with the intense pain. These traitors dared to do this, but those were his last words. Having finished here, Pluto and the shaman turned around. Now they had to deal with the guy who was pretending to be a princess. "I wonder where he is." Looking at him, Vera smiled. "By the way, he turned out to be quite quick-witted and managed to escape before I could deal with him." Pausing for a couple of seconds, Pluto turned his head. "Listen, Vera. You didn't get attached to him and decide to let him go just like that, did you?" Meanwhile, Aaron was lying in one of the destroyed houses, barely breathing. The poor guy was unconscious after a strong blow. The city continued to burn. The main square was engulfed in flames, and several silhouettes were already walking there. There were still many guards. Finally coming to, our hero gathered all his strength and tried to escape. He ran without looking where he was going, ignoring the pain throughout his body. Soldiers of the enemy army were everywhere. They searched every corner in an attempt to find the princess, who had somehow managed to escape. Terrified beyond belief, Aaron tried to hide and suddenly stumbled, falling onto a small box. He managed to hide. The poor guy just sat there, trembling with fear, listening to the guards searching for him. Aaron tried not to make a sound and just peeked out from behind the box from time to time, looking at the soldiers who no longer seemed so friendly. With trembling lips, he tried to cast a spell to turn back into a dragon, but nothing worked, and in his horror, he opened his eyes. But why wasn't anything working? The poor thing had already started to cry. Out of desperation, he was terrified. Now he was completely powerless. Still hiding behind the large box, he watched in horror as the guards searched everything around them. They had already found a piece of clothing and continued their search. Damn, they had just noticed him. Aaron quickly wiped away his tears. He couldn't let them find him, or else he would be doomed. How could he escape from here? He began to scan his surroundings looking for any kind of hiding place, but it was useless. Luckily for him, he suddenly noticed a staircase leading somewhere upstairs. This was his only chance to escape. He had to get out of there as quickly as possible. At the last moment, the guards turned the corner where they thought the princess was hiding, swords and torches in their hands. The men searched everywhere. They had to find the petite princess at all costs. Fortunately, our hero managed to escape. He quickly slipped up the stairs and was already running across the roofs of burning houses. He was breathing heavily and running without looking where he was going, driven only by fear for his own life. He had to escape from this nightmare. Meanwhile, Pluto and Vera were searching the scene of the battle. They had already done everything they needed to do, but it was still unknown how things were going in the other cities. The man looked away when he heard someone's voice and frowned. Several guards burst into the room through the broken doors. "Mr. Pluto, we've been looking everywhere for you. We have an urgent report." Kneeling on one knee, the soldier reported, "Our operations have been successful so far. The heirs are recruiting new recruits, sir. I must also report that the enemy army's wizards have been completely neutralized." Pluto listened attentively. He looked at Vera standing nearby and just smiled. The woman responded with a smile of her own. The man clapped his hands. "Excellent, guys. Good work. Are there any casualties?" The soldier replied, "Not yet. At least no reports of any." Smiling, one of the soldiers tapped his chest. "As long as we have this armor, ordinary weapons won't even scratch us." The commander stood up. "As you instructed, we must go and join the rest of the troops. Be careful, sir." Turning around, the soldiers withdrew. Vera was amazed. "It's incredible, we don't have a single casualty." Pluto grinned. "It's only thanks to the armor." He looked at his friend and narrowed his eyes. Of course, they're called great warriors, but the fact that they managed to survive in this hell does not make them heroes. Vera just snorted. "It's no surprise that people are still trying to get a tasty piece of the dragon's body. It's so useful." The girl turned away. "By the way, in your homeland, they don't eat komakon dragon bones. It's an ancient dish, by the way." The man's memory flashed back to that moment when he fought relentlessly against this huge monster. The dragon was truly colossal. Even then, Pluto ran forward, swinging his sword completely unafraid of death. The main thing was to defeat the monster. The dragon was incredibly strong, spewing huge jets of fire from its mouth that incinerated everything around it, as if it were hell. Seeing the expression on his face, Vera looked at him with understanding. "You still can't forget about it." "Yes, I regret it too, and I'm disappointed in myself." In response, Pluto just shrugged. It was clear that the man didn't particularly enjoy remembering those days, but he had to come to terms with his past. He turned away and shouted, "Do you really think we defeated the dragon only because of my abilities? My sword was completely useless then. I'm nothing." His friend narrowed her eyes and looked at him with understanding. She herself knew what had happened back then. Meanwhile, troops of soldiers were searching the ruined city for the princess, but they couldn't find her anywhere, even though she must be hiding somewhere nearby. Fortunately, Arena managed to escape, at least for a while, and now he was wandering through the abandoned catacombs somewhere deep in the city. It stank so badly that he had to hold his nose, and the poor guy just coughed. But there was one advantage: there were no people here. Memories of those moments when he talked to Mina still came to mind. Back then, she seemed like such a kind and sweet, naive girl. But she changed so drastically at that moment, just like everyone else, attacking him and wanting only to destroy him. The guy thought that she was no different from Reika, who had deceived him at the very beginning of his journey and sold him into slavery. The guy was breathing heavily with rage. He had to take revenge again. These terrible people had done such bad things to him. He had to become a dragon again. Even if his mother or the old man found out about it again, he had to take revenge. Aaron thought that as soon as he returned, he would immediately take revenge on his tormentors and those people at the auction who dared to buy him. He would simply devour them. The poor guy kept slowly walking deeper into the catacombs. There were only countless rats and the sound of water mixed with a disgusting smell. He was breathing heavily and thinking. It felt like something was blocking his mana flow, and now he wouldn't be able to become a dragon again. The guy was very exhausted, and the only idea that came to his mind was that if he explained to them that he wasn't really a princess, people would help him. But as soon as everything was fine again, he would turn into a dragon and destroy everything. That thought stuck in his head. In the end, out of helplessness, he plopped himself into the cold water. "Enough of these new sensations. I don't want to stay in this cursed world anymore." Meanwhile, seeing something red in the water, the guards immediately rushed forward to the nearby canal. "She's here." Several soldiers stopped and looked at the body floating nearby. It was indeed the princess with red hair. They had to get her out as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Aaron was unconscious. He was so exhausted that it was difficult for him to even open his eyes. He just floated with the current, not caring about anything. They quickly pulled him out of the water, and the guy was already lying on the wet concrete, barely breathing, literally choking on water. The guards crowded around him, one of them already furious because of this man. So many people had suffered, but one of them stopped him. "Wait, I also want to avenge my comrades, but first we need to report to His Majesty." The guy was still lying unconscious. But suddenly, a familiar voice was heard. Unfortunately, you cannot do that. All the guards instantly turned around. Pluto himself was standing behind them. The man had already tracked them down and was approaching. I'm afraid His Majesty won't be able to hear this report even if he really wants to. The man smiled broadly. Besides, this child has no value as a hostage, so don't bother. Better yet, give him to me. The blade glowed bright blue. Pluto's expression changed as quickly as possible, and he was already preparing to attack. Quickly dispatching the remaining guards, the man stood holding his blade. Vera ran up to him. There was no need to cause chaos. Our hero sat leaning against a heavy stone, still unconscious while the two argued. Pluto just smiled. Since when did you become so compassionate? Have you forgotten how you destroyed the ceiling and killed dozens of poor guards? The woman just sighed. This is a battle, after all. Anything can happen, but this is too much, you understand. She tried to look calm. In response, Pluto just smiled predatorily. So maybe you can explain to me what the difference is, although, whatever, it doesn't matter anymore. As for this child, we simply cannot let him live. Vera came closer. And why should we? Our hero just sat with his head down. If even one person in this world finds out about his existence, the invasion will lose all meaning. Don't you understand? The man began to whisper. The kingdom rebelled against the alliance and captured the heirs of each of the kingdoms. That is why, in order to save the future of their countries, we had to unite and invade the alliance. Don't you understand, or do I need to explain it to you? After listening to this whole tirade, Vera just sighed. Listen, aren't you talking too much? Yes, and it's hard to believe. Pluto just sighed. Everyone understands that people don't attack other states without a reason. If rumors spread, everyone will believe them. And if this kid survives, what will the others start saying? Have you even thought about that? Meanwhile, Aaron sat and listened silently. He was breathing heavily and seemed to be slowly coming to, but he didn't let the others know yet. The two knights discussed the plan, realizing that no excuses would work then, and a full-scale battle would begin. Wasn't that obvious? While the two were talking, everything was relatively quiet, but they had no idea that someone was already watching him. A shadow flashed near the stone. It immediately disappeared somewhere in the ruins of the destroyed city without attracting any attention. A strange man watched the unconscious boy lying nearby and kept a close eye on him, waiting for the right moment. Vera looked at her companion. Listen, why don't we send the real princess? Then our actions would be completely justified. Pluto looked at her and grinned. Are you serious? Then we would have to put all the blame on the real princess. The man spread his arms. Yes, and besides, it would be much more difficult for us to carry out our own mission and also protect the princess. Suddenly, Vera screamed as if she had seen something terrible. Her face changed instantly, and her eyes widened. The girl addressed her companion in a trembling voice. Listen, Pluto, look behind you. Doesn't anything seem strange? The man turned over his shoulder and saw that the body of their captive had literally disappeared, leaving only a stain behind. He flew into a rage. Where did the slave go? Vera, did you set this up? The girl flew into a rage. What are you talking about? You're blaming me again. In response, Pluto only growled. I didn't notice anything, but in his condition, it would be extremely difficult to go anywhere, wouldn't it? Leaning over the spot left behind by the boy, Vera looked closely. You're right. Most likely he's already dead on his way out of here. They exchanged glances and silently agreed that someone had probably helped him escape from here. An unknown man whose body was covered in shadow carried the poor boy on his shoulder far away from this cursed place. The knight just barked. In any case, he's already managed to hide. There's no point in running around looking for him. We won't find anything anyway. We'll just waste time. Thinking it over, Vera realized that only someone with the skill of a master swordsman could have pulled off such a feat, sneaking in here quietly and carrying the boy away. She thought to herself that in all 6 states, it was unlikely that there was a person capable of such a feat, and there was certainly no one like that among them. Pluto nodded. You're right. It's possible that some sorcerer took the boy or something. But the girl just snorted in response. No, if a wizard had gotten in here, I would have felt his energy from far away. Although, on the other hand, if it's not a master swordsman or some kind of sorcerer, maybe it's an evil spirit. Hearing such a crazy assumption, Pluto even shuddered a little. It was unusual for him to hear something like that from his girlfriend. There was only one option left. Maybe it was a spirit conjurer. As people with supernatural abilities are called, they are much stronger than someone who has drowned. The fact is that local wizards have the ability to control their mana. It doesn't take much to become a sorcerer. You just need to learn how to control it. Therefore, without innate abilities to control internal energy, even the most talented people are unlikely to become sorcerers. Vera cried out, Listen, if he managed to slip between us so unnoticed, then maybe he has psychic abilities. They stood and simply looked at each other against the backdrop of the burning city, still unable to understand who had managed to steal their slave. Meanwhile, The strange man was still carrying the boy on his back and had already made his way into the local thickets to hide. He carefully laid the child's body against a tree and leaned over him, examining him. It took only a few minutes to bandage his wounds. Aaron, still unconscious, just sat there, unable to resist. The strange man, who looked more like a shadow, looked at him with surprised eyes and did nothing. His black body practically blended into the darkness. Meanwhile, in the city, everything was already over. The fire was gradually subsiding, but the smell of blood and gunpowder still hung in the air. Now it was time to join the general mission. Vera and Pluto walked through the ruined city, surrounded by the bodies of fallen guards, and it was difficult to tell who was who. The man grinned. Tomorrow, Darius and the sorcerer must be killed. Everything is going according to plan, so there is no need to worry. Vera was also confident that everything would go as planned. The enemies did not have enough strength to resist, so it would most likely end quickly. Soon, the main palace of their enemies would be completely destroyed, and they would not have enough resources to resist the attack. Stopping in front of the other guards, Pluto smiled. Our king is truly a great strategist, having thought everything through so carefully. He approached his horse and was already thinking of jumping on, although it must be said that it was quite mean of us. But what can you do? Sitting on their horses, the two invaders rode away from the city. Whether it was mean or not, it was too late to talk about it now. We had won, and that was the main thing. Pluto did not argue. The man just bowed his head and smiled slightly. He was very pleased with the outcome of this adventure. Finally, he pulled on the reins and the horse reared up. Come on, let's get out of here. The entire remaining army moved forward toward the exit from the city walls. Only the sound of horses' hooves could be heard. The situation on the map had changed significantly after 300 years of the Alliance's existence, and it was on the verge of collapse. The action moved to a strange little house. A man woke up and, sighing heavily, got out of bed. He muttered somethings under his breath about not getting enough sleep again, his head aching from lack of sleep, but he forced himself to get up anyway. He threw on a white doctor's coat and put on glasses, now looking like some kind of doctor. The man came closer and smiled as he looked out the window. I don't know for sure what's going on, but this night really went well, didn't it? He looked out the window and smiled at the landscape. The man was in a very good mood. Although the air was still thick with smoke from the fire, he felt just fine, and there was a strange smile on his face. The palace of high-ranking officials and the royal family was burning with blue flames, inspiring hope for a bright future. He watched the palace burn and smiled. It was simply beautiful. The royal family would soon begin to recover from poverty. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound behind him. The man turned his eyes to the side and looked behind him in surprise. Someone was knocking on the door. The man moved away from the window, having finished looking at the landscape. Who else had come at such a late hour? The knocking continued. The irritated man came down from the second floor. Yes, I'm coming. Stop banging on the door. This man's name was Albert. Someone outside was knocking insistently on the door and calling his name. I need your help. Open up right now. Albert looked up and recognized the voice. It was his old acquaintance, Gabain. But what did he want again? Opening the door with irritation, Albert snorted. So why did you come so early? What do you want again? But then he froze. Gabain was standing in front of him. At the sight of his friend, Albert cried out, What happened to you? You look terrible. His friend was breathing heavily, clouds of steam coming out of his mouth. It was clear that he had been through a lot, but he was still managing to stay on his feet. Who's this? Albert looked at the boy hanging from his friend's shoulder. He looked even worse. Gabain said in a stern voice, There's no time to explain. We need to save him right now. Can't you see that the boy is in bad shape? At first, they thought it was a girl. Aaron was already lying on a soft bed and, yes, he was still unconscious, his whole body now bandaged. The doctor looked at his friend. Listen, you understand that this person can't be helped, right? People like this are usually sent straight to the morgue and not called patients, but Gaben just stared at him sternly from behind. Is there really nothing that can be done for this girl, Albert? You're a doctor. You took the Hippocratic oath to save people. There was nothing left to do. The doctor sighed heavily and looked at our hero. For now, the bleeding had been stopped, but it was unlikely that anything more would help. He removed the bandage, revealing a water spirit that had barely sealed the wound. Not a bad tactic for first aid, but it wouldn't last long. Albert turned and said in a stern voice, Listen, if there is no hope, then passing sentence is the only thing I can do. He looked his friend straight in the face. I understand that I'm a doctor and I want to save people myself, but not in this case. Can't you see that there's nothing we can do here? Gabain finally couldn't take it anymore. Well then, use that damn elixir. Then she'll definitely survive, you understand? What are you talking about, that elixir? Do you even understand what you're saying? It's so expensive. Albert flew into a rage. You understand how much I had to pay for this stuff, and I'm not going to use it on just anyone. The man just frowned and stared ahead with a serious look on his face. It was clear that he was struggling with himself inside. Listen, Albert, I understand perfectly well what it cost you to invent this thing and that you invested a fortune in it. The doctor flew into a rage. Well, you said it yourself. Do you really think I'm going to use such an expensive thing on this girl? What are you thinking? Gabin just kept quiet and tried to control his emotions. Poor Aaron lay on the bed and began to moan softly. He was barely breathing and trying to fight his wounds. Sitting down on a chair, the savior said, "This is not just a person, you see. Doesn't her appearance tell you anything?" The doctor just spread his arms. What nonsense. Where did you find her? And what should her appearance tell me? Looking at him with serious eyes, Gabin said, "I found her in Alcon last night. She was barely alive." Albert continued to rage. "There was a fire there last night. How did she even get there? And who the hell is she?" Frowning, his companion lowered his voice and said sternly, "I don't know who she is, but she seems to be very important to Carcer." After these words, Albert shut up and seemed to have swallowed his tongue. Apparently, this had an effect, and the man's face changed in an instant. Another day passed, and he tried to recover. Now he looked much better. Finally, the boy came to his senses and raised his head. He sighed heavily and rubbed his eyes from his long sleep. The poor guy closed his eyes from the bright light. Apparently during his blackout he had gotten used to not seeing sunlight, and just cried out. Turning his head, the boy noticed with surprise that he was lying on a bed in some strange place. "Where am I and why am I still alive?" He began to examine and feel his whole body. Nothing seemed to hurt, although he clearly remembered that he had already had one foot in the grave. Looking at his bandaged arm, Aaron smiled. So he had survived after all. It was hard to believe, of course, but how was it possible? He clearly remembered how soldiers with torches were chasing him and continuing to search for him throughout the city. He remembered hiding behind a box in an attempt to conceal his presence and had already resigned himself to the fact that he would have to part with his life in those very catacombs. His face changed, his eyes widened, and the boy began to remember all the horrors he had to endure in his past life, the fear and helplessness. He tried to use a polymorph spell to turn back into a dragon, but nothing worked. He was still human. He had to run. But suddenly, the boy stopped when he heard a strange noise behind the doors. It seemed like someone was approaching. The poor boy froze in his place. Horror covered his entire face. What should he do now? People would find him again and start mocking him. He immediately rushed into the window. It wasn't very high, so he could try to escape from there. He had already jumped out of bed and was thinking of running to open the window and jump out, and then whatever happens, happens. But suddenly, pain shot through his whole body. The door slowly creaked open. Aaron froze in place, expecting the worst. He just sat on the bed and watched. Albert appeared in the room. The man was holding a cup with a spoon in his hands, apparently bringing him something to drink, and smiled. "Finally, you've come to your senses." He immediately poured some water into a cup. All this time, Aaron was watching the strange man's every move intently. The doctor sniffed the drink and snorted a little. His eyes were more tired than angry. Apparently, he hadn't slept again that night. The man handed the boy a glass of water. "Listen, if I were you, I wouldn't refuse anything." Our hero still looked at the strange man with distrust. Although he saw nothing suspicious, his past experience made him wary. The doctor smiled. "I can see that you're scared, boy. That's a normal reaction when you wake up in an unfamiliar place. Let me explain. My name is Albert. I'm a doctor. This is my home and also my hospital. I'm in charge of your treatment now." But even that didn't work on Aaron. He narrowed his eyes. All the people he had met before had seemed trustworthy at first, but then everything went as usual. "You have to be on your guard." Meanwhile, the doctor just sighed. "Well, I see you're not very talkative, kid." The door swung open and Gabin entered the room. The man immediately asked, "Listen, Albert, has that guy come to his senses yet or not?" Gabin looked ahead with a stern gaze that sent shivers down one's spine. Albert said that he had woken up but was still silent as a fish. Seeing such a scary man in front of him, Aaron was terrified. Who was this guy? He was so scary. Where did he come from? However, the big man looked at him with stern eyes. There was no malice or hostility in them, only interest. A voice was heard. The man said directly, "Now I'm going to ask you a few questions. Answer honestly." Still frightened, Aaron stepped back. Leaning over him, Gabin growled his name. "Why were you being chased? And how did you even end up there?" The poor boy froze and didn't even know what to say. This man was too insistent, and he still hadn't fully recovered. Finally, Albert intervened. "Listen, stop tormenting him. You're only scaring him. It won't make things any better." However, the knight did not relent. "Answer me. Why did Pluto want to destroy you with his own hands? I want to know." Looking at him, the boy didn't know what to say. He was in shock and discouraged, and was already preparing to either run away or fight with all his might. Finally, Albert couldn't take it anymore and pushed his friend away. "Calm down, will you? Can't you see the boy is in shock? Besides, he's still my patient." The doctor gave his friend a stern look, clearly implying that it would be better for him to shut up. Finally, Gabin calmed down, muttered an apology, and sat down with a thud on a nearby chair. The bewildered boy watched all this, completely unable to understand why this strange man had suddenly stopped shouting. Lowering his head, Gabain became as quiet as a mouse and said only one word. "You understand, Albert. I just can't forget." He grabbed his head. "You understand, on that day, my parents, friends, and brothers all burned to death. And I won't rest until I find those responsible." Albert just looked at his friend with understanding and didn't say a word. There was a moment of silence. The doctor put his hand on his shoulder and said calmly, "Yes, I remember everything perfectly well myself." All this time, our hero just watched what was happening. Who are these people? A minute ago, they were shouting and now they're almost crying. But suddenly, a rumbling sound was heard. Aaron hadn't eaten in a long time and his stomach suddenly began to growl treacherously. The men immediately stopped their heart-wrenching conversation and looked at him, and the boy began to speak. "I'd like something to eat." A few minutes later, there were several baskets and a plate on the table with bread, sausages, and some kind of salad. The boy was questioned. "Who are you?" Aaron repeated irritably, probably for the 100th time. "I'm telling you again, I'm a dragon," as he stuffed bread into his mouth. The doctor looked at him with skepticism. "Sure, right, and I'm the king. Okay, what's your name?" Hearing this, Aaron cheered up. "Oh, so you finally believe me, fools? I am a representative of the Red Dragon clan, one of the strongest. True, I am still very small." The guy's eyes lit up. "Now hear my name and tremble with fear. My name is Carcerin," the guy said triumphantly. "Well, do you finally understand, little people?" Finally, the rumbling stopped. Gabin couldn't take it anymore and slammed his fist on the table. "Enough of this nonsense. This is complete gibberish." The man started shouting, "If you're going to lie, at least make it convincing. There isn't a single dragon with that name." Our hero was indignant. "How should I understand this? I mean, no, I'm standing right here in front of you. Isn't that enough?" Albert intervened again and tried to calm his hot-headed friend. "Listen, let's calm down a little." The man looked at the patient standing next to him. "Let's hear his story. Maybe you can tell us again. How did you end up here? At least tell us something." Aaron looked at his rescuers, finally looking up from his food but still clutching a piece of bread in his hands, and then began his long and highly implausible story. The boy said that he had run away from home and met a strange orc. He talked about how he met Reek, how that man saved him and brought him to a beautiful city, and then how the scoundrel sold him into slavery. The two men tried to listen and at least understand the story, but it only gave them a headache. Gabin began to get angry again. Finally, he sat down and folded his arms in front of him. It was clear that this guy didn't understand much about what had happened, but still. The boy snorted, "Okay, I hope you found out everything you wanted to know because I have a lot of questions too. Try to explain." Gabin looked at him intently. The boy asked, "Why do you claim that there is no dragon with my name?" Looking at him, the man became a little quieter. "You see, kid, Albert and I lived not far from a pass called Al Creed. Although people tend to avoid that area because of dangerous monsters, there are a couple of villages on the outskirts that are quite safe. Our town was one of them. Life in that town was peaceful and quite safe. People were happy, and we prospered. Until one terrible day when the village burned down completely, along with the people, leaving only ashes and pain behind." Hearing that an enraged dragon was flying nearby at that very moment, our hero fell silent and looked at the strange man with interest. Albert appeared nearby and lowered his head. His friend continued, "We were very lucky then. We were boys and escaped at the last moment." Gabin continued, "Thanks to the forest spirits, we were able to find out what happened then. There were no survivors. You see, in that terrible tragedy, it was not the dragon that was to blame, as everyone believes. It was a man." The man continued, "That day, I awakened my abilities and was able to communicate with the spirits. They told me the truth. People started a fire here. Since then, we have been wandering aimlessly around the world." Aaron continued. He listened attentively and for the first time in his life, did not interrupt. And at that moment, Gabin heard a song from a wandering bard about a red dragon with the same name as you, who had taken control of the pass. The terrible dragon burned the entire village to ashes and took the souls of those innocent inhabitants with him. That's exactly what the song said. Gabin smiled bitterly. "Good joke. Of course it was a joke. It's a pity that everything in that song was a lie." Albert finally joined the conversation. "I've lived around that place for a long time and haven't seen a single dragon in my entire life because spirits can't lie, right?" The doctor looked ahead with weary eyes, but in the end, we managed to find out what was going on. Then we found another survivor, and he told us the whole truth about what really happened. It turned out that they were all soldiers of the kingdom of Carcer. They had started the fire and killed innocent residents. The men exchanged glances, and then it became clear to us that no one denied that it was the dragon who had done it. They had blamed him for everything. From the very beginning, the fierce dragon was just a fabrication of the kingdom to shift all the blame and whitewash themselves. The doctor clenched his teeth in rage. Since then, the kingdom had been preparing an invasion plan for another decade. Our hero just sat there silently while the doctor tried to control his emotions. The boy just sat there and remembered all the events, which is why in the book he read with Reiko in the tavern, there were so many pages about him. Everything in it was originally fiction, but now everything fell into place, and he was simply hung with a non-existent guilt. The boy thought about it then. It turns out that he had never seen these people either, right? His eyes suddenly widened. If I'm just a fictional dragon, how could they have determined my name so accurately? Okay, never mind. The doctor sighed heavily. Besides, our original goal of kidnapping the princess has failed. As you can see, he placed a cup of steaming tea in front of the boy. Aaron, you came here instead of the princess, right? Apparently, she is somewhere else now. Finally, Gabin got up from his seat and leaned on the table. It turns out we didn't achieve anything, but at least we found out that the kingdom had a fake princess. Our hero took a few sips of the fragrant tea, which he found incredibly delicious, and continued to listen attentively. Finally, Gabin said he was going out for some fresh air. Albert looked at him with surprise and cried out. He wanted to follow his friend, but when he met our hero's gaze, he stopped right at the door and froze in place. Let's go check your wounds, buddy. Meanwhile, Gabin was walking through the streets of the city, where there used to be many people, but now there was only emptiness and the smell of smoke and gunpowder in the air. Just last night, life was bustling here, but now nothing would be the same as before, only burnt houses and emptiness. The man stopped near a sign. It was a tavern, where he often liked to relax in peacetime, but now everything was different. He threw open the door and went inside. The smell of smoke had seeped even here, and now, instead of beer and delicious drinks, there was only emptiness. An old bartender with a thick beard was standing at the counter, wiping a plate. He immediately recognized Gabin. Listen, buddy, you must have some business here since you came in. The man leaned toward the merchant. Something happened here yesterday, and you're still working on a day like this? The bartender just smiled. It's not so bad for ordinary people. He looked behind his friend. See for yourself, it's so early. There are even customers here. Indeed, at the next table sat several men dressed in knight's armor, having breakfast and talking among themselves. I wonder if the guards who are inside the castle walls will come, or if we won't see them now. The people continued to eat. Gabin just glanced at them, and the bartender continued, most likely. They ran away in the general commotion, although it doesn't matter anymore. Two men were talking, one of them shouting, "You can't imagine what the battle was like. I saw it all with my own eyes." Approaching them, Gabin growled, "Sorry to interrupt you. Can I buy you a drink?" The men immediately turned to him. As soon as they saw such a terrifying man next to them, they instantly sobered up. Where did he come from? Who is he? One of the guards looked closely and brought his alcohol-flushed face closer. Wait a minute, I think I recognize him. It's the legendary Gabin himself. What luck to meet him in a place like this. The men began to whisper. Is it really the legendary mercenary? Look at him. He's huge. It's definitely him. The man just exhaled. Thank you for recognizing me. It's nice that people still remember me. In fact, there were 4 great mercenaries in the entire kingdom, including Gabin and Rake, whom we all know well. They were legendary mercenaries. The man raised his hand and asked the owner of the establishment for a few more mugs of hot drink. He sat down opposite the 2 guards and said, "Well guys, let's start from the beginning if you're so eager. I'll be happy to listen." The guards exchanged glances and smiled. Really, who would have thought? We should have guessed right away that you weren't just talking to us. The bartender was already approaching with 3 mugs of alcohol and food under his nose, smiling and twitching his small mustache. The drunken and cheerful guards began to tell everything that was on their minds, about the destruction of the capital, about the fact that the messengers had been declared imposters. And it turns out that it was all the work of Pluto and Vera, the very dragon slayers of legend, who were now declared state criminals. The man, red from alcohol, said, "Of course it's a pity, but those guys fought with dignity and they deserve credit for that." But you know what was strange? The enemy soldiers were wearing some kind of strange armor that literally bounced arrows off them and couldn't be wounded. An experienced mercenary immediately understood what was going on. The invaders' armor was covered with dragon scales. That's why they were invulnerable. Downing a mug of alcohol, one of the guards said, "Well, the king is already in the next world, and so is his heir." In one day, the whole country literally collapsed. The man sighed heavily. You know, if I had heard about this by accident, I probably wouldn't have believed it. How did they even manage to cross the pass? The mercenary watched them and listened carefully to every word, trying to understand what was being said. Another guard also laughed. "You're right, buddy. When I first heard about it, I immediately thought this man had gone mad." The man smiled, his cheeks reddening even more from the drink, and he was already tapping his mug, asking for more. The mercenary looked at them with serious eyes and got up from the table. He had already heard everything he needed to hear. The man slammed his hands on the table, almost knocking it over. "I've paid for everything, so eat and drink as much as you want." The guard waved his hand. They continued drinking, and the mercenary turned and headed for the exit. The information had been obtained. The man was still thinking. It seemed that these people had brought some pretty impressive guys with them, which explained a lot. Meanwhile, in this small town, life went on as usual, as if there had been no invasion at all. Everything looked quite peaceful. Our hero, meanwhile, was extremely surprised. He never thought that this elixir would have such an amazing effect on the body. There was not a single scratch. He got dressed and was still smiling, rejoicing in his happiness. Not even a day had passed, and there was not a single mark on his body, which was strange. The doctor racked his brains trying to figure out how this could have happened. This boy was definitely not an ordinary person. The human body cannot recover so quickly. Hearing this, Aaron laughed. "I told you I'm not human. Now you finally believe me," he said, his yellow eyes flashing. Albert just spread his arms. "Yes, Mr. Dragon. Now I truly believe in your supernatural abilities." But then the man stopped and turned his eyes to the boy. "Then tell me this, Dragon. Why don't you return to your true form?" And immediately the boy froze in place, his eyes wide open. It seemed that he had been touched on a sore spot. Indeed, he could not return yet. "I have the same question. Something is interfering with the flow of my mana and I can't transform back. That's the problem." The doctor looked at him in surprise. But then Albert smiled, adjusting his glasses. "Where have you ever seen a dragon that can't control its own mana? I've never heard of anyone having difficulty with this process." The boy shuddered and moved away, even a little offended. "How did you even find out about this?" The boy jumped up and poked the doctor with his finger. Albert smiled. "I once wanted to become a wizard, but it was too difficult, so I quickly gave up." The doctor smiled a strange smile. "Unlike you, Mere Dragon, I haven't forgotten how to do it." The guy flew into a rage and gritted his teeth. "How dare you mock me? If I had the strength, I would prove everything to you right now, but I don't." Finally, the door flew open and the mercenary appeared in the doorway. He was out of breath and cried out, "Albert, where did you go?" The doctor looked at his companion. "Oh, you're here. Come on, tell me. You look like something important is going on." "I'm listening." Gabin, breathing heavily, looked at his companion. "Listen, Albert, this concerns the guy I just brought in. Do you even understand who he is?" Our hero just looked from one man to the other and blinked his eyes in irritation. Perhaps he was much more important than he seemed at first glance. In the end, they had to go somewhere. The experienced mercenary took the boy with him and dragged him away from this place. The man scanned every inch of the road with a searching gaze, looking for danger. He understood that such a valuable cargo would be hunted. Turning to his companion, the mercenary said, "We'll stop here for now. It's almost nighttime, so we need to rest." With a quick movement, he took a piece of bread out of his backpack and threw it to his companion. "Here, eat this. It should satisfy your hunger." Aaron appeared before us, but now he looked completely different. Instead of lush golden hair, he had a small black hairstyle, but his eyes gave him away. Before that, the doctor had been talking to the mercenary and couldn't believe his ears when he heard such stunning news. It turned out that the mercenary had managed to find out that the two kingdoms of Karsur and Araznan had secretly formed an alliance behind the backs of the others. The doctor was horrified, but that couldn't be. After all the representatives were at the meeting at that time. I remember correctly. The mercenary just looked at him calmly, while the doctor continued to protest. "But if something happens, all the heirs will be in danger." Now everything was clear. The heir, that is, the princess, was a front, and now everything made sense, and that made it even worse. The mercenary grinned and smiled. They had already begun to prepare in advance, but this time, luck was on our side. Soon they will meet their end. The boy just watched, swinging his legs as he sat on the bed. The mercenary jumped up to him and barked, "We need to liberate the city and prove the truth to everyone." He looked like a real revolutionary, ready to rush into battle right now. Looking at him, Aaron just sighed. "I don't know what's going on here, but it looks like we have to get ready to go somewhere again, and I just wanted to rest." The boy yawned. He already wanted to be home in his warm bed, away from all this nightmare. But when the mercenary took out a huge butcher's knife, the boy froze and looked at him with surprised eyes. "What are you planning to do?" The blade approached his face. The poor boy froze in fear, and goosebumps ran down his spine. "What are you planning, you madman?" But everything was much more prosaic. They just cut his hair, and now our hero looked exactly like a real boy, his hair now black. Well, now no one would suspect anything, and only Aaron was very unhappy. It was barbaric, but he didn't dare say anything. The two friends exchanged glances. "We're leaving right now, there's no time." Aaron was still surprised by his new appearance. Even his hair color had changed. Albert looked at his friend and smiled, wishing him luck. "By the way, buddy, be careful. Let's finally show them." For the first time in a very long time, a smile appeared on Gabin's face. A smile that held hope and something else. The man said in a firm voice, "Count on me, buddy." They shook hands firmly, just like in the good old days. "See you soon, Albert." And now they sat around the fire, which crackled with wood, illuminating everything with its warm orange glow. Our hero sat nearby, chewing bread and staring thoughtfully into the fire, devouring the wood. Finally, after finishing another piece, the guy raised his head. "Please tell me where we're going. You haven't said anything." The mercenary snorted and took a bite of his bread. "You know, kid, there's a saying. The less you know, the better you sleep. Just don't cause any trouble." Aaron looked at him resentfully. "How rude you are. Is it really so difficult to answer? Is it some kind of state secret?" The boy lay down, wrapped himself in his sleeping bag, and began to pester the mercenary with questions about where they were going. The man tried to hold back an answer evasively so that this annoying kid would finally leave him alone, but it was useless. Our hero continued to bombard him with questions and was already slightly irritated. "So where are we going? Tell me. I'm curious." In the end, Gabain couldn't take it anymore. "Enough already. Just shut up and come with me where I tell you to and you won't have any problems." The guy just snorted. Silence fell. The mercenary also fell asleep, closing his eyes slightly and leaning against a tree trunk, but he was still on guard. At this time, our hero was just pretending to be asleep. He wrapped himself in his sleeping bag and thought about how to get out of there quickly so that no one would notice him. But at some point, he felt like someone was literally getting inside his head. Aaron jumped up and shouted, "I heard the mercenary's voice. It would be better if you got those thoughts out of your head." The poor guy looked at him with angry eyes, and the mercenary said as if nothing had happened, "I may be asleep, but the air is watching you." The next day, there was still no peace. Our hero was already running somewhere headlong and begging to be saved. The boy's face was pure nightmare. Suddenly, a huge boulder crashed down just a few inches from him. Thank God the boy managed to jump out of the way. Several monsters were approaching them. They were creatures that looked more like pigs, only they walked on their hind legs. The mercenary stood in front of them, and the boy hid somewhere behind him. The man said they were trolls. However, Aaron didn't even pay attention to this. He was thinking about how fragile the human body was. Maybe he could just run away and survive. The mercenary was already preparing to attack. He barked, "Behind you! Stay close to me, kid. Try not to stand out." One of the monsters was already moving towards them with its toothy mouth, intent on devouring them. Its entire mouth was smeared with disgusting saliva. A grin appeared on the mercenary's face. It was supposed to be a smile, but the man was already preparing to attack. He moved forward, swung his sword, and with one quick blow blocked the monster's attack, striking it directly in its large club. The huge troll jumped back, raised his muscular arm, and prepared to strike the men again. There was a crash so powerful that even an experienced mercenary could not remain on his feet and flew to the side, crying out in surprise. But the cursed man was already prepared, standing in a fighting stance, ready for battle. He understood that the fight would be difficult. Using his spell, the mercenary released a strange creature that resembled a water spirit. The travelers stood behind each other, and the boy remained in place despite his attempts to escape, as if he had frozen. The huge troll suddenly slipped on the sticky liquid and fell down. His face changed, and the monster cried out in surprise. At one point, the monster was immobilized, frozen in place for a few seconds, giving the mercenaries time to attack. The man rushed forward, gripping his heavy blade tightly. This was his only chance to deal with the monster as quickly as possible. There was a sharp blow and a slight cry from the monster. The mercenary had managed to strike in time, hitting its muscular body with his blade. In less than half a second, the monster split in two and began to collapse to the ground, growling with rage. But that wasn't all. A second, equally huge troll was already approaching the man from behind, preparing its enormous hands to grab him. At the last moment, the mercenary noticed this and only had time to shout a spell to protect himself. The man understood that his life was in danger. Everything around him suddenly turned green. Gabin swung his sword again and struck the second monster with the help of the forest spirit. The troll froze in place. His face changed, and his eyes glowed with horror. He was even blinded for a second. Seizing the moment, the man moved forward, swinging his sword. He had to strike directly at the head to end this once and for all. There was a crash and a scream from the monsters. The mercenary destroyed them one by one with a single blow. No one even had time to react. Finally, it was all over. The man stood up, and behind him lay the bodies of the defeated monsters. There was a distinct smell of blood in the air. Looking at all this from the sidelines, Aaron glanced at the monster's body with disbelief. "Listen, they're definitely not coming back to life. You destroyed them all, right?" Turning his head, the mercenary said, "There's a chance that other monsters will come. That means we need to get out of here as soon as possible. Let's get moving." The day was already coming to an end. The travelers set up a small camp at the foot of the mountain again and lit a fire. Our hero just sat and stared into the fire, just like before. He was pretty exhausted. The day had turned out to be more difficult than he had expected. While the mercenary was cleaning his blade, Aaron looked at him. "Excuse me, sir, but I'm very thirsty." The man glanced at him. A second later, the boy was holding a small clay mug. The man stood and looked at him for a few seconds. Then it finally dawned on him, and Aaron began to rage. "It's just a mug. I can go get water myself. At least tell me where the spring is." The mercenary sighed heavily and cast the spell. One word was enough. At that moment, Aaron felt a splash behind him, as if a spring had just broken through, and something began to drip on his head. A second later, water poured into the cup, as fresh and cool as if it came from a forest river. For a few seconds, our hero just stood and stared at the cup filled with water. So this is what a forest spirit is like. It's spiritualism, but so far it seems harmless. At that moment, he glanced at the mercenary sitting nearby. It would be useful to possess such magic if you think about it. In the end, he couldn't stand it anymore and jumped to his feet and shouted, "Listen, what do I need to do to learn spiritualism? Teach me." Gabine finally looked away from his weapon and sighed. Even though it's called a skill, it can't be learned. It's an innate ability. But the boy didn't give up. He pointed to his chest and said, "Listen, maybe I have such skills too. After all, I am a dragon, aren't I?" The man lowered his head. "If you can feel the spirit of, say, the wind or water, then maybe I did." This stumped the boy, and he froze in place. "So you're saying that this man just washed his face and became a sorcerer? I thought that research was needed here." They sat by the fire. The mercenary adjusted his blade. "In any case, if you knew how to control spirits, you would have felt it long ago." Finally, Gabane hissed, "Listen, if that's all the questions for today, then stop bothering me with trivialities. I'm tired of it." Aaron just glanced at him. What an arrogant man. I just wanted to talk and he's already grumbling. Scratching his head, the boy looked somewhere into the thicket of the forest. If I had known it would all turn out this way, I would have studied hard when I had the chance. And yet he is a dragon after all. He was born to wield magic. He must have such abilities. Well, let's try. Standing up, our hero approached the fire, which continued to crackle, devouring the wood one log after another. He looked at the burning fire, and an idea popped into his head. Maybe he could try to control the fire, for example. After all, he could feel its warmth. Coming even closer, Aaron leaned his hands against the burning embers and felt the warmth of the fire spreading throughout his body. He repeated only one word, warmth. He tried to concentrate and feel how he could control the fire, but so far, it was all to no avail. The mercenary who was watching all this took his eyes off his weapon and asked the boy, "What are you doing there?" Without being distracted from his strange activity, Aaron continued to cast spells. "Look, I can summon spirits just like you, for example, the spirit of fire." The man narrowed his eyes, thinking that something was wrong with the boy's head, but he continued to watch this strange spectacle. The effect was instantaneous. The boy grabbed his hands, which had turned red from the hot flames, and screamed. He began rolling on the floor and screaming, "It's so hot!" The mercenary just sighed. "Listen, kid, what did you expect? Even fish are cooked over a flame." But as we can see, life had taught him nothing, and our hero decided to try again, now with even greater enthusiasm. He stood up again near the fire and began to hold his hands directly over the flames, repeating the single word, warm. In the end, even the mercenary's patience ran out. He jumped up from behind and smacked the boy on the head. "Enough of this nonsense, go to sleep." Clutching his head, hurt and offended, Aaron looked at the man. "Old man, why did you hit me?" Hearing what he had been called, the mercenary turned around. "What did you just say, kid?" Realizing that he had said too much, the boy said, "You probably just heard wrong." In the end, our hero went to bed. He had to try again. It had to work. He hadn't given up on the idea of mastering fire magic. Turning his head, Aaron noticed that the mercenary wasn't even going to sleep. He looked at the man with surprised eyes. "Are you even going to sleep?" It seemed to me that lying down would be more comfortable, but the mercenary just sat down leaning against the wall. He sighed heavily. "If I fall asleep, the monsters around me will think I'm defenseless and attack. This area looks peaceful, but I can't let my guard down. Stop talking and go to sleep." Our hero just snorted and covered himself more tightly with the blanket. He was already tired of this meaningless conversation. He tried to fall asleep, but he kept thinking about the damn old man who was constantly grumbling about everything he did that he didn't like. And I don't even know where we're going. The mercenary continued to sit with his eyes closed, even though he was protecting Aaron, of course. But how dare he treat him like that? Finally, with heavy thoughts, the boy finally fell asleep and began to snore. In the end, he finally got tired and shut up. At night, while the others were sleeping, something very strange began to happen. The fire, which had been crackling peacefully with wood, flared up. Aaron woke up immediately. The mercenary was also awake and had already grabbed his sword. The boy shouted about what was happening. And then the most unexpected thing happened. A huge pillar of fire rose straight out of the flames and turned into a real explosion. The boy jumped aside in surprise and almost flew into the wall. The fire was so strong that he couldn't even stay on his feet. Even the mercenary did not understand what was happening. This pillar of fire appeared literally out of nowhere, and the boy was already tumbling upside down. The two travelers froze in place when their neat campfire turned into a real blaze that threatened to turn into a fire. Coming to his senses, Aaron began poking the fire with his finger. "Uncle, look, I did it! I tried hard and it worked out just like I told you." The mercenary froze in place and stared ahead in bewilderment. It was the spirit of fire, there could be no mistake, only it wasn't unusual at all. The man summoned the spirit of water to somehow protect himself and the boy from the flames. They were covered by a thin veil of water that began to evaporate. The experienced mercenary felt his whole body burning from the flames. This was a very unusual spirit. It was much stronger than the others. A strange creature appeared before them. It was the king of the fire spirits. First, his eyes appeared, and then his eyebrows, which were incredibly thick, if you could call them that. The two travelers stood frozen in surprise and watched this strange spectacle. It was the first time in their lives they had seen anything like it. Overjoyed, Aaron began poking the strange creature with his finger. "Look, old man, it's a fire spirit. I summoned it myself, didn't I?" The mercenary barked, "Stop talking nonsense. This is the king of fire spirits named Ifrit. Do you even understand what you've done? He won't even leave ashes of us behind. Humans are not allowed to communicate with them." The fire spirit continued to look with interest at the two people who dared to summon him. Finally, the ghost stood up to his full height and his loud voice boomed, "Who dared to summon me?" He immediately looked up at the mercenary. "This is your doing." Responding immediately, the two travelers froze. Lifting his head, Gawain began to apologize in a trembling voice. "Great Spirit, please forgive me, but I am only an insignificant human being. Even with my abilities, I would not dare to address you directly. I simply would not have the strength." The Ifrit smiled. "Of course, I understand that. I would not respond to the call of a mere mortal. Even though you look impressive, you are just an ordinary mortal." Our hero's hand appeared nearby, and his thin voice rang out. Of course, it was me. The boy ran forward with joyful cries and pointed at himself with his finger. "Excuse me, did I summon you by accident?" A heavy hand immediately fell on his head, and the mercenary pulled him down, causing the boy to squeal in surprise. Gawain pushed him to the ground. "You fool, bow immediately. I'll have to teach you some manners. Don't you understand who you're talking to?" But in less than a couple of seconds, the mercenary's powerful body flew to the side and crashed into the wall with such force that it left cracks. The fire spirit began to get annoyed. "Shut up, mortal. It is not fitting for a human to meddle in our affairs." The boy turned around in surprise. But then he immediately looked at the fiery spirit. The ghost continued to speak. "Come on, boy, explain. Did you summon me or not?" Aaron grimaced. "Well, yes, I did. I just thought it would be cool if I summoned someone powerful. It's fun." Somewhere behind him, the mercenary was trying to recover and watched this madman with horror, while the fiery spirit continued. "Are you sure about that? Then you will pass my test without any problems." Seeing the fire monster raise its huge fist above him, Aaron froze and raised his head in surprise. There was a loud crash and the boy's entire body was engulfed in flames. He didn't even have time to understand what was happening before an unbearable heat rose around him. The poor boy began to scream, but his cry was lost in the raging fire. Aaron felt that his whole body was about to burn up, but somehow he still managed to hold on. Trying to get to his feet, the mercenary screamed in fear, but he could do nothing else. The spirit was several times stronger. The Ifrit continued to stare ahead and smiled strangely, folding his arms across his chest. He seemed interested and surprised. Even despite the intense flames, Aaron remained unharmed, and even his clothes were untouched. The guy was alive. He looked at his hands in surprise. They were hot, but it didn't hurt at all. It was strange. On the contrary, he felt much better than usual. The mercenary couldn't believe his eyes. What was going on? Even an experienced spellcaster wouldn't have survived something like that, but this guy was fine. A second later, the hair on the boy's head turned its usual fiery orange color. He was still looking ahead in surprise, but now without fear. The fiery spirit looked at his summoner. "Listen, you are the daughter of the great dragon." Stopping in his tracks, our hero looked at the fiery spirit and remained silent for a few seconds. "They're confusing me with a girl again." "You see, sir, that's not quite right." He raised his head and looked at the Ifrit. The spirit was surprised. "That's for sure." The mercenary struggled to his feet and listened to this strange conversation while the guy was arguing with the huge fire spirit. Hearing that he was standing before the descendant of the great red dragon, the man froze. That can't be. How did that happen? And then he began to remember how the guy kept saying that he was actually a dragon, but no one believed him because they thought it was just childish babbling. And then it dawned on the mercenary that this guy was definitely saying he was a descendant of the red dragons, the strongest in the world. Goosebumps ran down the mercenary's back. His eyes widened. It was true. Spirits couldn't lie. Could it really be true? Putting his hand on his heart, Aaron said triumphantly, "I'm not a daughter, I'm actually a son. Everything else is true." The fire spirit bowed before him and began to examine the boy with interest. "So, it turns out she has a son. How surprising." You look like her, although you do have something of a boy about you. But what's with your voice, kid? You sound like a girl. Aaron looked at him with surprised eyes and began to remember. He suddenly grabbed his neck. I'm sure my voice was changed back then in the royal palace. One spellcaster changed it, let's say, for his own purposes. The image of the sorcerer, who had seemed very scary at the time, reappeared in his mind. When the spirit asked why he would not return to his true form, Aaron became a little embarrassed. You see, there are some problems with that. The mercenary continued to listen. He held his wounded arm and couldn't believe what he was seeing. Such a mesmerizing sight. At some point, an idea came to his mind. Maybe it really was magic, and he should check it out when the opportunity arose. When the boy was asked how old he really was, Aaron froze. If he revealed the whole secret now, it would definitely be the end for him. His mother would find him again. He had to lie. The boy said he was almost 500 years old. The spirit leaned over him and said in a stern voice, I know you're lying, boy. It was useless to try to justify himself. Aaron showed 3 fingers. Okay, you figured me out. I'm only 300. Are you satisfied? I've already told you everything. The spirit frowned and looked at him. I see. So you're the dragon everyone's been talking about. Now, everything is clear. Aaron raised his head, looked at the fiery spirit, and asked, Excuse me, uncle, how did you even know that I was really a dragon? No one believed me. The spirit frowned his huge eyebrows. Only a red dragon can withstand the heat of the Spirit King's flames, and I immediately guessed that you were strong, little one. The boy continued to bombard him with questions. Okay, so you already know everything about me, but how did you find out about my mother? Tell me. You see, boy, you look too much like her in human form, so I immediately guessed that you were her daughter. Well, her child, you understand. With his hands behind his back, Aaron began to think. He just used the books from the library, that's why it turned out so similar. But suddenly she guessed something. You said that dragon, so what does that mean? The spirit narrowed his eyes. So you really don't know. Well, okay. You're the first dragon in history to run away from home? After these words, Aaron was horrified. So Mom already knows everything. I'm definitely done for. They'll lock me up for hundreds of years. How quickly rumors spread, even in the world of dragons. They already know about this. Mom is probably furious right now. And that damn old dragon too. The spirit leaned over. All right, ask your questions, boy. I don't have much time. It's unlikely that we'll ever meet again, so go ahead. Taking a deep breath, Aaron finally decided to ask, Listen, uncle, do you happen to know why I can't turn back into a dragon? The spirit thought for a moment and snorted. Who knows? Maybe it's some kind of curse. No one knows for sure yet, so I can't tell you for certain. Hearing about his curse, our hero exclaimed, Listen, can you help me remove it somehow? I'm tired of being in this insignificant body. The huge fiery giant bent down. No, I can't. I have power, but only in the spirit world. Nothing more. The boy stood before him and listened attentively while the demon continued. I know nothing about magic. You belong to a completely different race. I'm sorry, I can't help you. After this refusal, Aaron lowered his head. What a jerk. And I thought this fire old man could help me. That's how it turned out, but I only know the spell of polymorphism. The spirit leaned even closer. So how can I tell your mother about your whereabouts? She can easily remove the spell. Hearing this, Aaron immediately waved his hands. No, don't call my mother. Please don't. She'll leave me with nothing. Have mercy. An image of his mother looming over him with a monstrous look in her eyes immediately popped into his head. He didn't want to see her just yet. Having already lost all hope, our hero just lowered his head. After all, he had summoned this spirit for nothing and hadn't learned anything. All right, there's nothing I can do. The boy raised his hands. Then teach me how to summon spirits. The fire giant snorted. That's no problem. The mercenary could not believe his eyes. This little kid was asking the king of fire spirits to teach him a spell. Who did he think he was? The Ifrit began to half dissolve into the air. Well, meet some guys who are suitable for you in terms of level. A dragon's face appeared from the fire, along with several other mythical creatures, a phoenix and some kind of fish. Our hero's eyes lit up with happiness. Wow, so these guys are going to help me. That's cool. The Spirit King looked down on him. Okay, I summoned these guys for you, but now it's up to you. You're a red dragon. You have enough power. Aaron spread his arms wide. So that's how it is. Come on, guys, come to me. He was already prepared to accept his new pets. Several seconds passed, but the spirits did not move. Why are they frozen? Let them come here. I am summoning them. Finally, Ifrit lost his temper and barked, Didn't your mother teach you how to summon? You have to say the name. You understand. The name. The boy scratched the back of his head. So that's how it is. What are their names, uncle? Please tell me. Now he looked incredibly stupid. The King of Spirits sighed. Listen, the lowest level spirit is called Casa, the bird. The lizard is called Salamandra. She is of the middle level, and the last is Ignis, the dragon. The boy began to count on his fingers how many spirits he now had and repeated their names. The king looked at him and frowned. Okay, we figured that out. Are you pronouncing them correctly now? Try summoning at least one of them. Clenching his hands into fists, Aaron tensed up. Why was it so exciting? It was as if he were in some kind of adventure novel. This moment was truly fateful. He wrapped his arms around his shoulders and curled up into a ball, ready to summon his first real army of fire spirits. Our hero began to twist and wave his arms strangely, as if he thought it would help him feel more confident. Finally, putting his hands forward, the boy shouted all 3 names and barked, "I command you to appear." Behind him stood a mercenary who had already lost all faith in humanity. What is he doing? He's completely insane. What kind of pose is that? But before the boy could finish his summoning spell, flashes of fire began to swirl around him, and the spirits appeared at his call. He turned his head, trying to understand what was happening. It was a little scary. It was his first time encountering something like this, and he didn't know what to do with it all. But in the end, he realized that the spirits of fire were finally obeying him. All he had to do was say their name. This is just great. The mercenary stood somewhere behind him and just watched. He had already come to terms with everything and was not surprised by anything. This guy seemed incredibly strange to him. Realizing what he had accomplished, Aaron broke into a smile. Excellent. Now, I'm a real spirit summoner. But isn't that cool, man? Look. Suddenly, he pointed his finger at the dragon, which for some reason had become too small. Listen, what happened to him? Why isn't he obeying me? The king said in a stern voice, Boy, you cannot yet control higher-level spirits. When you come of age, he will obey you. Our hero froze while the spirit was confused. Listen, Ignis didn't respond to your call, but I came. Although I am the king of spirits, how did you even manage to do that? Lifting his head even higher, the boy shouted, I told you, I just thought it would be cool if you appeared at my call, that's all. Ifrit folded his arms across his chest and snorted. It's very strange, you know. Only the most ancient dragons can summon me in my true form, but you were able to do it so easily. Our hero just looked at him thoughtfully. What's the problem? I just wanted to, so I called you. Is there something strange about that? The spirit continued to tower over the boy and pondered. There's no problem. Even for the most experienced dragons, this is not yet possible. This guy is breaking all the laws of the natural world of spirits. What's wrong with him? I can't ignore this. I have a responsibility. I am the king of spirits. The giant snorted. That's all I can do to help you, boy. I don't want to get involved in the internal conflicts of the dragon world. So goodbye. The mercenary and the boy watched in amazement as the huge fire giant dissolved into thin air at the speed of light, leaving behind only a faint haze. When it was all over, Aaron looked away from the spirit, which had left behind only a handful of ashes from the bonfire. Apparently, he really did have a lot to do. Meeting the gaze of the mercenary, who was now completely pale from the experience, the boy asked, Uncle, what's wrong with you? The man stood frozen, staring wide-eyed at Aaron. So you really are a dragon, then? The boy just snorted indignantly and folded his arms across his chest. I've told you about this 100 times, but you always ignored me and didn't believe me. There was a pause between them that felt like it lasted several centuries. The mercenary still didn't know what to do after what he had experienced. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as if someone had fallen. Aaron turned his eyes to the side and froze in place. A huge man knelt before him on one knee like a knight swearing allegiance to his king. He bowed his head, his voice becoming much quieter, and now he looked completely submissive. Gabain began to speak. Lifting his head, he shouted, Allow me to serve you faithfully from now on, O great Aaron, descendant of the red dragons. Hope burned in the man's eyes. After such a sudden change, our hero was even a little confused. He stepped back and blinked his large eyes. What are you talking about? The mercenary continued, placing his hand on his heart. Accept my oath. I beg you. From now on, I pledge to serve you faithfully and truthfully. The boy still did not understand anything. The mercenary was shaking so much that his fingers left furrows in the ground. He kept repeating one thought in his head. If only he could carry out his little revenge. Taking his sword in his hands, the man barked, I am Kurt Gobain. I swear to serve you with eternal loyalty. He now really looked like a true knight. Looking at this strange event, Aaron didn't know how to react. The man's mood changed in an instant, and he was no longer grumbling strangely. Finally, it began to dawn on him, and our hero exclaimed to himself, Wow, that's so cool. I thought that only happened in books. Excerpts from recently read books came to mind, where knights swore allegiance to their queen while holding a sword in their hands. This is the knight's oath. Our hero was still standing in front of the man, blinking in surprise, wondering what he should do now. The boy cringed. He really wasn't dreaming. This was all happening for real. Kurt looked at him and asked, Sir, is something wrong? Clearing his throat, Aaron tried to pull himself together. Calm down, he thought. Just like kings behaved in heroic stories, he had to live up to the image. He held out his small, pale hand. Kurt looked up and stared in surprise. What do you want, kid? The man cringed. What was he thinking? Shouldn't this guy just take the sword as a sign of my loyalty and that's all he expects? Our hero was still standing with his hand outstretched. Kurt pondered, but I can't just correct him. Although on the other hand, dragons have never accepted oaths. Oh well, I'll have to improvise. The man bowed his head and resigned himself to the shame he would have to endure. He took the boy's hand and touched it with his rough lips, uttering the oath, I swear eternal loyalty to you. From the outside, it looked comical. However, our hero seemed to like everything. He just stood there and smiled broadly, now thinking that he was a real king. Well, or whatever they say. They sat by the fire and talked. Kurt told them that he wanted to take his revenge. You heard our conversation, sir, so you know what's going on. With his hands behind his back, Aaron was already lying in his sleeping bag. Yes, I did suffer serious injuries in that fire after all. It had only been a little over 3 months since our hero had become human, and in that time he had experienced so many interesting things. He was even dressed up as a princess and forced to take part in a conspiracy. But the coolest thing was probably sailing on a ship. It was quite fun. When he was a princess, it was quite fun. But when he was a dragon, everything was boring and monotonous. And now, look how everything has turned out. In the end, the guy jumped up. Wait, I should also hate Cersei and take revenge, Kurt snorted. Yes, if you want to. It seems that Aaron only got more excited. Great, let's take revenge then. I've become stronger, so I'll go and just burn all these nasty people. So what's our plan? Kurt just looked at him with a weary gaze. After all, he's just a child. He thinks it's all a game. According to the information, Kurt's hometown was destroyed by order of the king and his daughter, the very princess you were disguised as. Therefore, the main targets are the king and the princess, but it's not so easy to get to them with the dragon slayers around. Aaron listened carefully and grew angrier with every passing second. They want to make a carpet out of him. How is that permissible? The mercenary ended his story with the words, If you, sir, find a way to return to your true form, we will easily be able to crush our enemies. But the boy immediately put his hand forward. No, it's too early. I've become strong enough now, and I have a partner. There's no need for my mother to find me so quickly. He jumped out of his sleeping bag. Listen, Kurt, do you happen to know a wizard who could help me instead of taking me home? The mercenary did not argue. Yes, sir. I know a wizard who is currently working in a neighboring town. We can head there. Our hero beamed with joy. Great, let's go there. Our next destination is the wizard from the city of Libid. Let's hurry. The mercenary sighed. It was time to lay all his cards on the table. Excellent, let's do that. The man did not argue. He raised his head and said loudly, But sir, we were headed there from the very beginning, so our goals coincide. Then everything went on as usual. The guys sat around the campfire and our hero tried to control his new spirits. He was getting better at it. The boy trained his bird, Casa, a small fire phoenix that flew around him and obeyed his every command. Kurt had just returned with a new batch of branches and looking at the boy sighed, Sir, I don't mind your games, but at least take off your cloak. The child just laughed. There's no need to worry, he won't burn me. Don't be afraid, he's my pet now. The mercenary just sighed and glanced at the boy, but still did not argue. It seemed strange to him, but even somehow peaceful. Folding the brushwood, the man exhaled. You know, sir, you're not at all like the dragons I knew. You're more like an ordinary person. In response, Aaron just laughed. Well, yes, I'm just a dragon. You can be sure of that. You've already seen for yourself. Picking up 2 stones, the mercenary began to try to start a fire. He kept thinking about what had happened. It turned out to be not as easy as it seemed at first glance. Seeing Kurt's unsuccessful attempts to start a fire, Aaron became enthusiastic. You want to start a fire? I'll help you. He waved his hand and summoned a salamander with a single movement. I'm a fire mage now, so it won't be a problem. A fiery lizard appeared out of thin air and immediately moved towards the fire. The mercenary wanted to stop it, but it was too late. In a matter of seconds, Kurt's face was covered in soot. Oops, it seems someone got a little carried away. Seeing this, our hero immediately cried out, Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. The boy smiled, and the mercenary wondered how someone with such a cute face could be a terrifying dragon. He looked more like an innocent child. In the end, they reluctantly lit the ill-fated fire. Now they could rest a little, but the night was still long. But this idyll was interrupted by a strange sound, as if branches were crackling. Someone was definitely approaching them from the thicket of the forest. There was also a scream. The travelers immediately turned toward the forest and listened. The scream came from somewhere far away and seemed to be moving. The mercenary immediately became alert. It seemed that a person had fallen into a monster's trap. Although it was rare for anyone to attack people here, you never know. Hearing this, our hero immediately became excited. Well, let's go save the poor guy. We can't just leave him alone in trouble. Kurt looked at him as if to ask, Are you completely out of your mind? But then again, he was just a child, so what else could be expected of him? The man stood up. Sir, doesn't this bother you at all? Aaron smiled. Is there anything threatening us? At that moment, the boy thought again. I listened to you, Kurt, and now I feel uneasy. You know how to ruin a situation. The mercenary looked into the thicket of the forest. Of course, he didn't want to risk his life now, when the plan was at stake, but he wanted to help if possible. A plan formed in the man's head. What if we build a fire on the other side and go in the opposite direction? That might help. Suddenly, the boy said it would be better if the monster quickly devoured this man. Kurt flew into a rage at what he had just said. With sincere incomprehension, he asked, "What did I say that was wrong? Wouldn't it be better if the problem solved itself and we didn't get involved?" The mercenary flew into a rage but tried to control himself, his teeth gnashing with anger at how anyone could think so recklessly. Aaron continued to stare ahead with innocent eyes, as if he genuinely did not understand what he had said wrong. Suddenly, there was a crackling sound from the thicket, and the silhouette of a girl appeared. She was running headlong forward and asking for help. She lost her footing, stumbled, and flew straight into the mercenary's arms. Kurt didn't react immediately, but he caught the girl in time, preventing her from falling. The poor girl in tears began to beg, "Please save me. Monsters are chasing me. They want to eat me." Suddenly, a monstrous roar came from the forest, causing the trees to shake. All three froze and looked into the thicket. The mercenary immediately ordered, "Sir, summon the spirits now." The boy did not hesitate and summoned the salamander. "Now we will test our new pets." Several pairs of piercing red eyes were already glowing in the thicket, staring directly at the three travelers as if they were prey. In less than a couple of seconds, the silhouettes of several monsters appeared from behind the trees. They looked like dogs but were covered in some kind of strange bluish flame. The boy had never seen anything like this before and cried out, "Who are they?" Kurt shouted, "Damn it, it's the Lanistry! Now we're in trouble!" He raised his hand and instantly summoned his water spirit. Everything around them was covered with a transparent film, protecting them from danger. Still not understanding anything, the boy turned around and asked who they were. Kurt replied that these monsters were created by ancient magic a long time ago. One of the monsters stared at them with piercing red eyes and grinned. These monsters were much stronger than trolls and all the others. Even despite the danger, our hero was already prepared to fight back. There are only a dozen of them. My fire spirits will definitely deal with them. Well, upon hearing that fire had no effect on them, Aaron was horrified. What a mess. Why such a setup? He just wanted to appear heroic. Although, come to think of it, look, these monsters are burning too, so it makes sense that fire has no effect on them. Listen, Uncle, I have a question. One of the fiery wolves rushed forward, opening its wide mouth to reveal a multitude of sharp teeth. They would have to attack them blindly. Kurt rushed forward. It was difficult for him to cope alone with nearly a dozen high-level monsters, but he tried. Now it was only a matter of time before they reached them. One of the monsters was already leaping forward, snapping its toothy mouth. Realizing that danger was approaching, Aaron shouted that they had to run away from there. However, Kurt understood that it was too late. They would not make it in time. The monsters literally surrounded them on all sides. There was nowhere to retreat. Aaron turned his head, searching for a way out, but saw only danger. Fortunately, there was a river nearby, and an idea immediately came to the boy's mind. Maybe they could use it. Uncle, you said that water is their weakness. Our hero began to think about how to lure these monsters into the river. It wouldn't be easy, but the idea came to him on its own. He raised his finger and shouted, "Kurt, I know what to do. Stay calm." The poor woman looked at them with eyes crazed with fear. A monstrous thought crept into the mercenary's head. "What do you want to accept, sir? Could it be what I think it is?" But it was too late. Our hero had already summoned his two fire spirits and directed them straight ahead. The boy's eyes burned, and suddenly there was a loud crash. After the monstrous explosion, a huge column of black smoke rose into the sky, visible for many kilometers. Kurt was thrown back by the shockwave, and the man barely came to his senses after the powerful blow. He was breathing heavily. The man struggled to open his eyes. So, his good idea was to use an explosion. It would have been a good tactic if the monsters weren't resistant to fire. He looked at his burned hand. Although the shockwave was powerful, it couldn't have done much damage to the monsters. While the man was struggling to get to his feet, Aaron jumped up to him. "Uncle, I've already solved the problem. It literally evaporated." The boy laughed. "Now we can continue on our way." He already had a huge backpack on his shoulders. Kurt was still trying to recover. He looked at the boy with surprised eyes. "You mean you planned it that way? You couldn't have destroyed those monsters with just your explosion." But suddenly, a terrible thought struck the man. "It can't be. You really did it." That same girl was already on the other side of the river. Our hero began to explain, "You said yourself, Kurt, that they were only interested in the girl. That means we weren't their target." Several monsters were already standing on the other side of the river, not even understanding how to get across. Now the mercenary understood everything. The explosion wasn't meant to destroy the monsters, but to send the girl to the other side of the river. Clearly pleased with his prank, Aaron looked at the mercenary. Well, what do you think, Kurt? Cool idea, right? The woman was unconscious, and maybe she was in a little pain, but I calculated the force of the explosion so that she would stay alive. Turning away, the boy was already getting ready to leave. Well, it's time to get out of here. Kurt was still standing rooted to the spot, thinking. A shiver ran down the man's spine. This boy inspired terror with his mere appearance, even though he looked like an ordinary child. The travelers were already moving forward along the forest path. Aaron was walking ahead. Well, the monsters definitely won't follow us here, so we can rest easy. Our hero laughed all the time. Well, this time I really was useful, right, Kurt? The mercenary just walked silently beside him with his head down. Suddenly, Aaron heard the man call his name, stopped and turned his head, still smiling broadly. Stopping, Kurt asked in a weak voice, "Sir, please tell me why you did that." The boy looked at him. He sincerely did not understand what he had done wrong. "What are you talking about, Kurt? I helped get rid of the monsters." The mercenary finally couldn't take it anymore. "Yes, that's not what I'm talking about." His voice was now loud, mixed with bitterness and some kind of resentment. The boy looked at him with surprised eyes, completely unable to understand what was going on and why this old man was grumbling again. Kurt lowered his head and sighed. "Yes, you helped save this girl from the monsters, but she is apparently badly injured, and the likelihood that she will soon pass away is too great." The man sighed heavily. "So he wasn't wrong about this kid. It turns out we just bought time to escape and sacrificed her." With sincere incomprehension, Aaron looked at the man. "What's so bad about that?" He bowed his head and blinked his big eyes. Soon they set up camp again. Still gloomy as a cloud, he sat with his head down thinking. Meanwhile, the boy was just happy and having fun. With his head bowed, the mercenary thought that if he racked his brains, the boy really wasn't to blame at all. After all, he wasn't really human. Aaron grabbed a piece of bread and began to chew vigorously. On the other hand, it was unlikely that this guy felt guilty when he ate others. Finally, the mercenary made up his mind and began to speak. "Sir, I must tell you that you did the wrong thing today." The boy turned his head. His eyes again showed sincere incomprehension. "What are you talking about, Uncle? I saved our lives. Is that so bad?" Folding his arms in front of him, Kurt began to speak. "I understand, sir, that you are a dragon and you have your own ideas, but right now you are in a human body. But you must follow human rules. You can't just get rid of obstacles like that." The boy exhaled. "What kind of rule is that? We help each other. That's the law of human life." The mercenary's voice was stern but at the same time tired. Aaron looked at him and snorted. "But that's not always the case. There are people who take each other's lives, aren't there?" The mercenary couldn't argue with that. He had to agree. He fell silent for a second, lowered his head, and sighed heavily. "You're right, sir, but there are special circumstances, such as fierce battles where people really do destroy each other, and I'm the same. But on the other hand, you can never drag women and children into this, who cannot protect themselves, who are weaker than anyone else and need our protection." Without a shadow of a doubt, the guy replied, "But we also almost went to the other world because of those monsters. We're just food, aren't we?" In the end, the mercenary couldn't take it anymore and brought his heavy fist down on the boy's head, growling, "Yes, because it's always been that way. That's why you're so stupid." In the end, the man calmed down. That's how people are. Understand that you can't do that, and that's all there is to it. Thoughtfully, Aaron looked somewhere off to the side. "I think I understand everything." Joy suddenly flashed across the mercenaries' faces. Finally, the gods heard me, and this guy started to understand, really. But suddenly, our hero just folded his arms across his chest and said, "It seems that people don't get along with logic at all, as far as I can see." "That's right, isn't it?" After that, the mercenary just lowered his head. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" The man had completely lost the thread of the conversation and almost fainted. Aaron just plopped down on the ground. "I mean, killing hundreds of people in war is normal, but hurting someone you don't know is a crime, as far as I can see." Tired of this conversation, the boy wrapped himself tightly in his sleeping bag and turned away. "That's it. I'm going to sleep. The conversation is over." The mercenary remained in silent solitude with heavy thoughts in his head and began to reflect on the situation. He looked at the dying fire, and a single question arose in his mind. Could he have done the same? Otherwise, if he had been alone, he didn't even know. The man folded his arms in front of him. "We were just trying to survive. I probably wouldn't sacrifice people for my own life, but I wouldn't save them either." He raised his head and looked at the night sky. Next to him, Aaron was peacefully snoring deep in sleep. The man continued to ponder. It turned out that this guy was partly right. It is unlikely that our hero would have heard this agreement, as he was already fast asleep with his eyes closed, but the mercenary watched. People are indeed very contradictory. The next day, the battles continued, and now the huge orcs were caught in the heat of the battle, unable to withstand the power of the fire spirits. Our hero stood and destroyed monsters in batches, and it seemed to bring him some satisfaction. The fire phoenix flew beside him. Kurt appeared behind him and clapped his hands. "Congratulations, sir, you are very good at controlling your pets," he said. The boy just snorted. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore. "Of course, someone is waiting for us at every turn. If it's not some kind of monster, then it's a robber. What do you think I should do?" Kurt looked at him in surprise but said nothing. Indeed, the journey had turned out to be a little difficult. The boy couldn't take it anymore and snorted, "How much further do we have to go?" Kurt came closer and encouraged him, "Hang in there a little longer. We'll be there soon." The man looked down from the cliff. All he could see was dense forest, and somewhere in the distance he could see the river. "Soon we should be able to board the ship." Their journey continued. They walked along a path into the forest. Suddenly, Kurt said, "I was thinking maybe we shouldn't have come." The boy looked up and stared at his companion in surprise. "Uncle, what are you talking about? All we've been doing is walking through some thickets to avoid the city." Thoughtfully, Kurt said, "All this time I've been worried about your safety. That's why we're avoiding cities, but the likelihood that you've been reported missing is extremely low. If they were really looking for you all over the city, they would have put up posters with the princess's picture, but with your name on them. Then people would have realized that a substitution had taken place and that the princess had simply been replaced. There would have been popular uprising." They moved on. Kurt looked ahead with a focused gaze. Soon they would arrive in the city. They needed to prepare. A small village appeared before them on the riverbank. There was a small ship there. They needed to find out if they could board it and replenish their supplies. Life in the village was peaceful. Fishermen were going about their business, and some were preparing to board the ship that was about to set sail. Kurt and Aaron entered the city. It was noisy as usual, with townspeople going about their business, paying no attention to the newcomers. The mercenary looked away and said, "Sir, wait here for a few minutes. I'll be right back." Our hero didn't even have time to say anything in response. He turned his head, and the mercenary had already disappeared somewhere. They moved on, and suddenly the boy saw a portrait on the wall depicting Kurt. Aaron exclaimed, "Look, there's a real celebrity among the people." The man turned his head and was about to respond with some sharp remark, but his face immediately changed. It was a wanted poster with his own face on it, and a reward of several hundred gold coins. The man was accused of robbery, arson, and several other crimes. A chill ran down his spine, and LOL broke out in a cold sweat. It couldn't be. How did they know it was him? He immediately began to recall the moments when he snatched the boy from under the noses of the dragon slayers. They might think that he was, at worst, a spellcaster. The mercenary gritted his teeth in rage. The situation was getting more complicated by the second. If they were recognized, it would definitely be the end for them. On the other hand, there weren't that many spellcasters in Alcan. Perhaps they had checked everyone by name. Kurt. The man pressed himself against the wall and began to study the poster intently. Aaron looked at him with surprised eyes. Suddenly, the mercenary's heavy hand grabbed his wrist. Aaron cried out in surprise and didn't even have time to react. The man immediately dragged him somewhere into the gateway. "Forget what I said about supplies in the ship, sir. We have to get out of here. We can't get on the ship." He dragged the boy toward the city exit. "We need to leave this place immediately." Kurt understood that they could not use the ship to escape, only to walk along the riverbank, and only on foot. They ran down the main street of the city and didn't even notice that they were being followed. A strange figure flashed somewhere off to the side. A man in a dark cloak stood around the corner of one of the houses and watched the strange, frightened travelers, never taking his eyes off them. In the end, Kurt and the boy left the city in a hurry and found themselves somewhere in a dense forest. Aaron could barely keep up with the man. Finally, the boy couldn't take it anymore. "Wait, what's going on? Why are we running so fast? Is someone chasing us?" Finally, the man stopped and looked at him over his shoulder, breathing heavily and trying to calm himself down. "Yes, sir? They're chasing us. Did you see that poster? That means I've been declared a wanted criminal." Aaron looked at him with uncomprehending eyes. "But here's the problem, sir." The mercenary lowered his eyes. "They don't want me. They want you. Do you understand that or not? You're in danger." Hearing such shocking news, Aaron looked at the mercenary with surprised eyes and pointed at himself. "Me? But why would they want me? What did I ever do to them?" The boy began to protest. This situation was beyond his comprehension. Kurt said, "You are their reason for attacking. That's why. More precisely, you were their reason. You understand? Without you, everyone will realize that these two states had no reason to start a battle. That's why they're chasing us." They stood on the country road and looked around. Suddenly, they heard a crackling sound, as if something was approaching them. They immediately became alert and looked in that direction. Aaron listened and heard a painfully familiar voice, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it before. The mercenary turned his head from side to side and shouted, "Where are you hiding? Show yourselves immediately, cowards!" Suddenly, a voice rang out from above. Kurt raised his head and looked ahead with furious eyes. There, above them, 4 dragon slayers stood frozen in place, literally levitating in the air and watching them. Kurt stopped and froze in place, raising his head. It was the same sorcerer next to them. The man recognized him. Worse, the legendary and renowned knight Darius was with them. He looked at them sternly, his eyes filled with nothing but rage and a desire for revenge. The sorcerer smiled. "Look, our boss is popular," Pluto snorted. "It's just because of the armor. It shines too brightly." The offended knight looked at them with a clear question in his eyes. "Why are you bothering me?" But he said nothing. He felt a little ashamed at that moment. They were still watching the two fugitives. "Okay, it's very cool, but floating in the air is a little impractical. Let's go down." Kurt gritted his teeth. Damn those guys. They didn't seem to notice him at all. He doubted they had even paid any attention to him. The worst thing was that among them was the Black Knight Pluto. It's hard to deal with this guy. He seems to be immortal. And then there was the Supreme Sorcerer among them, who could raise the city to the ground with a single spell. Frozen in place, the mercenary looked at them. Before him were all the Dragon Slayers. One would have been enough to strike terror, but here they were all at once. Kurt looked at Pluto and realized that although he had a pretty good reputation among mercenaries, compared to this monster, he was nothing but dust. The boy clearly noticed the mercenary's anxiety and looked at him with a frightened gaze. He already understood that things were bad. In the end, he recognized his opponents himself. Aaron gritted his teeth in rage. "So it was you guys. Now I understand everything." Worst of all, Mina was standing next to them. The girl looked at him and smiled. "Come to me, boy. It's time to go back to the palace. We've been looking for you for so long." The Dragon Slayers finally descended to the ground and now stood in full parade before the two fugitives. Finally, Aaron couldn't take it anymore and cried out, "Do I look like a madman to you? You tried to send me to the other world, thinking I had forgotten." Gritting his teeth in rage, Kurt hissed, "How did you even manage to track us down? We were hiding." The man was trembling with fear. The heroes just exchanged meaningful glances, while somewhere behind them, the sorcerer grinned. The mercenary couldn't take it anymore. "We deliberately walked through the forest so that no one could track us down. Of course, I saw my poster in the city only once. It can't be that someone reported seeing us here, as if you knew our location from the very beginning." In the end, the sorcerer couldn't hold back and laughed so loudly that even the leaves fell from the trees. Of course, before going to the other world, one must satisfy one's curiosity, mustn't one? He stretched into a predatory smile, but to be honest, I would have liked to tell you about it myself. That would have been wonderful. Do you have any idea, Kurt, how much effort it took me to find you? All I knew was that you were a spellcaster, nothing more. The man spread his arms. Of course, you didn't have many, so I had to narrow down the circle of spellcasters. So here's what I decided to do to make it easier. I simply scanned the circle of suspects with my clairvoyance magic. I simply scanned all the spellcasters in the city with my clairvoyance magic. To be fair, it was difficult and took about a week, but as you can see, it was a success. I could only scan one person per day. That's how I found out your location, you fools. The sorcerer was delighted with all this, only thanks to my abilities. An irritated voice was heard from behind. "Pluto, yes, we understand that you're the coolest here. Enough bragging already." They began to argue with each other. Loud voices could be heard and even some friendly laughter. Kurt shrank to the size of an offended kitten. They even had time to joke around. It seemed that these four did not perceive him as a rival at all. Suddenly seizing the moment, the White Knight looked somewhere to the side, heard a strange sound, and ran towards them. Swinging his sword, Kurt summoned his spirit of wind in a second and ran forward. It was his only chance to attack. All four were right in front of him. All he had to do was strike. Although it wouldn't do any good, at least it would buy some time. Seeing this, Pluto grabbed his sword and smiled. "You want to fight me? All right, let's see how strong you are." But suddenly, everything went wrong. There was a loud crash. Dust rose into the air, and the four hunters looked at each other. Darius could barely stand on his feet. He stood with his eyes wide open, not understanding what had happened. Only the sorcerer laughed. "Yes, I knew from the beginning that you were just throwing dust in our eyes to escape. Did you really think it would work?" But everything was much more complicated. Breaking out of the smoke screen, Kurt moved forward, swinging his sword. "First, we have to deal with this summoner, then it will be easier." The sorcerer turned his head in surprise. The mage just looked at him and did nothing for the time being. Although he looked like a supreme sorcerer, he was physically human. Swinging his sword, Kurt had already come up with a plan. First, he had to stun the wizard, and then try to escape from here. But he didn't have time. Pluto appeared from the side and was already ready to attack. The man just grinned at his opponent. "You think I didn't understand anything?" And immediately, the mercenary felt a powerful blow from the blade. He barely had enough strength to stay on his feet. Pluto came closer and smiled. "What else did you want? But not bad. At least you withstood my blow. That's already worthy of praise." "Then, here's some more." The man swung and struck again. The poor man flew to the side. He was already beginning to run out of breath, and this was only the beginning. The Black Knight ran forward, swinging his sword, turning into a real ferocious beast that had sensed its prey. At one point, Kurt felt a powerful blow to his stomach and bent over in half, his insides feeling as if they had been mixed together. He flew at such a speed that he broke several centuries-old trees with his body and stopped somewhere in the thicket of the forest. Pluto was already approaching and laughing. "What are you doing on the ground after the first blow? I thought you'd be tougher than that, old man." "To be honest, I'm disappointed." The man smirked and looked at his opponent with a victorious gaze. He already understood that this mercenary's days were numbered. Lifting his head, the wizard sighed. He understood that he could have dealt with this runt on his own. Why did he have to call all three of them? Spreading his arms, the man cast his spell. Everything around him was flooded with bright yellow light. It was a radiance. Sitting almost unconscious, Kurt raised his head with great force and saw the heavens open above him. The poor man was already prepared to say goodbye to life when he heard a rumbling sound. The wizard smiled. "You know, buddy, it turns out you're friends with common sense. I thought you were a complete fool." Kurt sat leaning against a tree, clutching his sword in his hands. He was able to guess what the spell was and block it, albeit with difficulty. Pulling his hood over his head, the wizard came closer. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're weaker than we thought, does it?" Finally, coming to his senses, Aaron rushed to his companion to help him in any way he could. Kurt was already on his last breath. The man's voice was too weak. He was almost whispering. The boy ran up to him. "You're badly injured. How can you walk?" The child was very frightened. "You have to protect me. I still can't turn into a dragon and take my true form. Have you forgotten?" "Come on, get up immediately." The mercenary sighed heavily. He realized that arguing with this man was useless and tried to move. While the boy was fussing over his wounded companion, the sorcerer's voice was heard. "Of course, he's fine. Who would doubt that he would survive?" Stretching out his hand, the wizard said, "I had no intention of sending him to the other world with this spell. It was just a light greeting." With difficulty, the mercenary tried to get up and breathed heavily. Damn, he was wrong after all. The difference in their strength was too great. Suddenly, Aaron began to think, "No, that won't do. Now it's my turn. Now you'll see what I can do." At some point, the mercenary felt a warmth behind him, and a bright yellow light illuminated the entire space. "I'll fight too, guys!" Our hero instantly summoned a salamander, his whole body covered in fire, and prepared to attack. The sorcerer froze in place for a couple of seconds, as if unable to believe what had just happened. "It's the spirit of fire. Wait, but how is that possible?" Pluto came closer. "Listen, this guy has also learned some spells." The sorcerer looked at him. "I don't think so. He was just an ordinary slave, wasn't he?" Our hero was already starting to get angry, although would he have allowed himself to be kept in slavery with such abilities? But now, it was too late to think about that. A voice was heard from behind. Vera just snorted. "If I had such abilities, I wouldn't let anyone near me." The Black Knight snorted. But who was he? The sorcerer came closer. How did this boy manage to develop such abilities in such a short time? Looking at him, Pluto asked, "Is it possible to learn spiritualism in just a couple of days?" The sorcerer sighed. "Don't you know about this? In the past, spiritualism could be developed quite quickly, and almost every knight could do it." He sighed. Well, everything fell into place. Looking at them, Darius sighed heavily. "Guys, you've forgotten that we have serious business to attend to here. We can talk later." "Okay. Anyway, we're dealing with spirits." Aaron was already ready to attack and directed his salamander straight at the enemies. Finally, Kurt came to his senses and tried to stand up. In a weak voice, he said, "Sir, I'm fine. I can continue fighting." Pluto immediately noticed him and perked up. "Hey, you seem to have come to your senses. You're even standing on your feet, ready for the second round." The poor man could barely stand on his trembling legs and tried to remain upright, knowing that one blow would finish him off. Coming closer, Pluto laughed. "Look at yourself. You can barely stand. Are you sure you want to continue? We'll find out right now." The knight had already moved forward, but at the last moment the mercenary blocked his attack with his sword, albeit with great difficulty. The knight was surprised himself. How had he managed to hold out? He was barely standing. It wasn't easy. The mercenary, overcoming excruciating pain, tried to hold on with his trembling hands, clutching his sword and trying to block. Finally, he barked, "That's not all. My comrades call me the king of mercenaries, or have you forgotten?" But suddenly, it all ended as quickly as it had begun. The man collapsed and fell to the ground, immediately pinned down by several large rocks. His whole body was pierced with pain. Although he had attacked first, his strength was still waning, and he had forgotten that. Approaching his wounded opponent, Pluto laughed. "So you're our king of mercenaries. Well, that explains everything." He bent down and smiled predatorily. "What about your 4 comrades? I remember them too, or have you already forgotten?" He stepped on the mercenary's face with his huge boot and began to squeeze. Kurt only groaned in pain. Suddenly, Darius intervened and stopped his comrade. "Listen, Pluto, he's wounded. Don't go too far. I saw that he's a skilled swordsman. The Black Knight just laughed. But if that's the case, then he really is the king of mercenaries, isn't he? Let him fight then. He turned around and shouted to the sorcerer, I heard that this guy is definitely not Asar Ahim. It seems I was right. You lost the bet, my friend. That's the name of the sorcerer who appeared too long ago to be remembered. The most powerful spellcaster of the era, capable of controlling the spirits of absolutely all the elements. The wizard just sighed. I thought we had caught the great spellcaster. It turned out to be an ordinary mercenary. What a pity, but I don't care. A heavy foot landed right on the poor mercenary's face and pressed him into the stone with such force that the man only grunted but did not have time to do anything. But suddenly, Pluto, who was already ready to finish off the unfortunate mercenary, heard a cry, Stop! Stop immediately! I'm back! A fiery salamander flew straight at him, cutting through the air like an arrow. Another second and it would have hit its target. At the last moment, the man managed to jump aside, and the fiery spirit flew right past him somewhere to the side, but the knight already felt the heat. There was an explosion behind him, and the man smiled. Ah, yes, that little summoner is still with you. We haven't settled things yet. The boy looked at him with eyes full of rage and was not going to back down. It was clear that he wanted to see this through to the end. Leave him alone and fight me. The man smiled. I want to spend my time on you. Besides, I don't have the abilities of a spellcaster. I can't fight you, boy. His face immediately changed. The man was predatory, so stop being a thorn in my side and just obey for your own good. Suddenly, Vera interrupted the conversation. Listen, she said, rather maliciously. Aren't we just villains now? How rude you are. Suddenly, the girl stopped when Pluto said, Stop interfering, we're just following orders, aren't we? Suddenly, she looked behind the man and cried out, Hey, you better look behind you. The knight turned around and suddenly felt an incredible heat all over his skin, as if a huge fire was approaching him at breakneck speed. A huge fire lizard was approaching them at breakneck speed. Another second, and it would have turned the two of them to ashes. It seemed that our hero had achieved exactly what he wanted. He released his fiery spirit and shouted, Come on, salamander, burn everything to hell. Vera realized that now was her chance and moved forward, ready for battle. It was time to teach this boy some manners. She took a few steps forward and stretched out her hand as if nothing had happened, as if she wasn't afraid that the fire spirit would turn her to ash. As soon as she touched the salamander's face, the monster began to dissolve into thin air, as if it had never been there. Seeing this, Aaron looked on in surprise and cried out, unable to believe that someone could deal with the fire spirit so easily. There was an explosion. Vera raised her hand and with one deft movement, destroyed the fire spirit as if it had never existed. Frozen in place, our hero couldn't believe that his salamander had been defeated so easily with just one touch. A look of genuine horror appeared on the boy's face. She stopped it with a single movement. This woman is incredible. A gentle voice was heard. Vera approached the frightened boy. Let's put these dangerous toys aside and finally have a normal conversation. Her face had changed dramatically. Vera no longer looked like a kind girl. She looked like a monster, or an enraged mother who had caught her son smoking. Under her pressure, Aaron couldn't cope and plopped down on the ground, crawling back to the wall. He understood that this was no time for jokes. But contrary to all expectations, the girl did not attack him. She simply held out her hand and smiled kindly, with almost maternal warmth and said, Come with me. We won't try to hurt you anymore. The boy still looked at her with a haunted gaze and understood that this was most likely a lie. There was a moment of silence. Aaron, still frightened, looked at her with surprised eyes and finally decided to speak. Are you serious? Tell me. Suddenly, his patience ran out and he shouted, Do you think I'll just believe you? You tried to kill me with your own hands. Sighing, Vera said with a hint of irritation, Yes, you're right. At that time, I really wanted to get rid of you, but now the situation has changed. Think about it carefully. Finally, our hero got up and dusted himself off, but it all looked a little strange, especially considering what they had done to poor Kurt, who was still lying unconscious from such a powerful blow. The boy was still listening, and Vera continued, Think about it yourself. He's just a mercenary who only knows how to swing a sword, and you're just a boy. Her face broke into a smile. You know, if we wanted to send you to the other world, you'd already be there. You didn't think that would cause us any trouble, did you? Number. Before that, there was a scandal in the royal library. Voices and shouts could be heard everywhere. Vera insisted that we couldn't just take this boy's life. Where else would we find someone who looked exactly like the princess? The rest of the team was standing near the mirror, checking the spellcasters, when suddenly all three turned to her. In a tired voice, Pluto said, Listen, guys, you're against this, am I right? You yourselves wanted to send him to the other world. The sorcerer sighed. We're not in the best situation right now. Things like this only work once, twice won't work. Even the White Knight was sure. Vera, listen, this could ruin all our plans. You understand how dangerous it is. The girl wouldn't let up. Yes, listen, we still need to give him back his real voice, don't we? That will clear us of all suspicion. Besides, the operation with the princess has already been completed, and so successfully. So why are you refusing just because of your stupid, imaginary fears? Finally, the wizard snorted. You know, when I think about it, you're right, but it's hard to say how it will all turn out. Tomorrow, the whole plan could go down the drain. But anyway, the sorcerer agreed. All right, Vera, you've convinced me. We'll spare his life. There was a moment of silence. The girl remained silent and looked away. You probably already realized that she had already grown attached to this boy. And now they stood facing each other, and the woman asked for the 100th time, "Are you ready to come with me? Even if you don't want to, I'll make you." These words did not inspire confidence at all. Aaron looked at her and stepped back. Two feelings fought inside the boy. He was very afraid and did not know what to do. And the poor boy began to think hard. On the other hand, the mercenary had already taken a beating, and the salamander had been destroyed. There were no mowers left in his sleeve. In the end, he had to agree through gritted teeth. The boy lowered his head and said, "Fine, I'll go with you." Finally, Vera was able to breathe a sigh of relief, but behind her she heard the sorcerer's irritated voice. "Well, did you finally manage to persuade him or not?" But even if so, there was one more thing. The sorcerer looked in the direction of the mercenary, who was already halfway to the other world. Poor Kurt lay there with his eyes half open. "We can't just leave this man here, you understand?" He already reached for the mercenary's body. Seeing this, Aaron cried out. He didn't really want to give this man away. It's hard to say, but perhaps he had also grown attached to him. Suddenly, the boy shouted, "Stop!" His voice rang out with such force that everything around him shook at that moment. The sorcerer stopped immediately. His eyes literally popped out of his head in surprise. He froze in place and just stood there. The White Knight also stared at the boy in surprise, apparently so struck by the boy's voice that he simply froze in place. The sorcerer turned and looked with frightened eyes at the boy who dared to contradict him. Now there was only fear on the man's face. Our hero was still standing in front of them, seemingly unaware of what he had just done. Aaron simply froze in place and waited for something. The man looked at him and barked, "That was a perfectly executed spell. I heard that voice only once and you dared to repeat it in front of me." Immediately, the sorcerer twisted around and grabbed the poor boy by the throat. The poor guy didn't have time to do anything and just hung in his hands. Leaning over him, the man hissed, "Of course, we must first get rid of the evidence, and I will start by removing the spells that changed your voice." He began to take back the mana he had used. Everything around them was flooded with a bright blue color, as if they were now in the ocean. The man used a cancellation spell, and a predatory smile spread across his face. Now everything is back to normal. The boy couldn't resist and simply succumbed to the sorcerer's will, now hanging limply in his hands like a lifeless doll. The man looked at him and smiled. "Well, now your old voice has returned. You can rejoice." There was a predatory smile on his face. There was no more evidence left. Aaron still stared ahead with surprised eyes, unable to believe what had happened. He tried to say a few words and suddenly realized that his old voice had indeed returned. Now he really spoke like a boy. He began to remember the moments when he tried to turn into a dragon, but nothing worked. He still couldn't use the polymorph spell. Besides, the fire demon had said that some kind of spell had been cast on him. Maybe that was it. The thought struck him, and now everything made sense. That's why he couldn't use his spell. The spell that changed his voice interfered with the flow of mana, but now it was removed and he could try again. Everything was back to normal. The sorcerer finished his work and shouted, "Now we can go back. The job is done. I hope you're satisfied now." However, Vera looked at him over her shoulder and the boy began to speak. "Now I can return to my true form. That's right, isn't it?" Lowering his head, Aaron continued, "Thanks to my power, I will be able to change the law and show you my true will." The sorcerer looked at the boy with surprise in his eyes. What is he talking about? Is this some kind of spell? It's ridiculous. But suddenly Aaron rose into the air as if he had begun to levitate. Unimaginable energy gathered around his body and began to swirl like a whirlwind. Pluto already thought that this kid was up to his old tricks with these spirits again. I'll deal with him now. However, the knight stopped him. Darius felt a long-forgotten sensation and couldn't believe his eyes. Could this really be what I think it is? The boy's eyes were covered with a white veil, and he began to transform back into a dragon. A strange vibrating sound was heard. Then there was an explosion. Vera closed her eyes so as not to be blinded and took a few steps back. She was shocked and didn't understand what was happening. The knight stood and just watched. He remembered that long-forgotten feeling. He only felt it when the dragon approached. The sorcerer froze in place, his eyes filled with genuine horror. With trembling lips, the man uttered only one phrase, "This simply cannot be." When the smoke cleared a little, the heroes saw the terrifying silhouette of the dragon. It was so huge that it blocked out the sun. And now, the sorcerer stood before the huge, colossal dragon, trembling all over. He couldn't even imagine that such a thing was possible. Finally, the dragon returned to its true form, opened its wide mouth and roared so loudly that the trees began to bend. The four heroes couldn't believe what they were seeing. They just froze in place and stared with wide eyes. Finally, even the mercenary came to his senses from such a monstrous roar. Kurt began to look around to see what had happened. Had he gone mad or lost consciousness? With a flap of its wings, the dragon easily rose into the air and began to soar in the sky directly above the poor mercenary. The man raised his head and, unable to believe what he was seeing, said in a weak voice, "Mr. Aaron, is that really you?" The dragon smiled, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Yes, I finally managed to return to my true form." "Cool, huh?" He flew into a rage. "Well, humans, now I will definitely destroy you. It's the end for you. Only ashes will remain." Vera couldn't believe her eyes and just stood there rooted to the spot. Pluto shouted, "Is this guy really a dragon? How did this happen?" The sorcerer was still standing rooted to the spot. "Yes, that can't be. People can't just turn into dragons. It defies the laws of logic." However, Aaron was already looking at them with burning eyes and baring his toothy mouth. Unless he was originally a dragon, then that would explain everything. Pluto was surprised. "Are you saying he has such power? He endured all this. But why did the wizard snort? Who knows? Dragons are unpredictable creatures." Suddenly, Darius's voice was heard from the side. "Hey guys, sorry to interrupt your interesting conversation, but maybe we can discuss all this later. Right now, we need to get ready." The man gripped his sword tightly and prepared to attack. "This dragon is going to attack us." And indeed, Aaron soared into the air and flew straight at the knight, flapping his wings and roaring with such force that the earth began to shake. Opening its wide mouth, the dragon let out a thunderous roar that echoed for miles around. The knights had to cover their ears with their hands so as not to go deaf forever. What was happening? The dragon laughed. "Well, how do you like that, little people? Now you understand my true nature." The heroes stood below and looked at the monster in horror. Meanwhile, soaring upward, Aaron continued to mock the insignificant humans. "Now you understand that your strength is meaningless. Now you are finished." Realizing that the monster was about to attack again, the White Knight shouted, "Careful, step back. He's about to breathe fire." And so it happened. Aaron swung his arm and exhaled a huge jet of fire that poured straight down, incinerating everything around him. The knight froze in place and watched as the colossal fireball approached him. The man did not know what to do. He understood that he was doomed. There was a loud crash, and the knight ran for his life. Everything around him turned into a blazing hell, as if meteorites were falling to the ground. The dragon cursed, "God damn it, you damned humans! How hard is it to hit you? Why are you so small and nimble?" The sorcerer barely came to his senses and already saw the dragon preparing to attack again. The man froze in place and stared in horror at the approaching danger. The dragon had already lowered its heavy paw to the ground. "But now you're caught, you insignificant human. I've got you for sure." But suddenly, to his surprise, the dragon noticed that the sorcerer was holding on with his last ounce of strength, using his spell to block the dragon's paw. Aaron flew into a rage. "How the hell did you dodge that? I'm going to destroy everything here. It's the end for all of you." And then all hell broke loose. The dragon destroyed everything in its path, and stones began to fall from the sky. Pluto and Darius tried to save their lives. Suddenly, one of the knights remembered how he had fought the white dragon, but this was a whole different level. Now everything was different. This dragon had literally gone mad and was destroying everything around him. Aaron was furious. Looking closely, Pluto realized that these two seemed to be the same size, so dealing with him shouldn't be too much of a problem. The dragon continued to destroy everything around him, uprooting trees and destroying the ground, me, and the forest landscape. Pluto exhaled. "You know, buddy, you're right. The atmosphere here is completely different from last time. It seems we're dealing with a rabid dragon." Finally, the sorcerer also came to his senses. It seems that this dragon's attacks are too simple. He just swings his arms and breathes fire. The man looked ahead. They can be the same size if it's a red dragon. I'm right, aren't I? He jumped aside, dodging the dragon's huge tail. It seems that this monster is still a very small dragon. Coming to their senses, Pluto and Vera were already preparing to attack. Maybe this dragon is much weaker than the last one. The man smiled, stretching into a predatory grin. "Well, guys, it looks like we can easily handle it. Don't worry, but we were afraid." The sorcerer was still suspended in the air. "We don't know for sure, don't forget. You understand that red dragons are incredibly strong, although there is one thing. We have a chance against this monster." Aaron was still turning his head, looking ahead with his yellow eyes, searching for his opponent. "Why can't I hit him?" Everything around him began to break as if an earthquake had started. Poor Kurt, who was at the epicenter of this nightmare, tried to at least survive. The man raised his head and cried out, "Mr. Aaron, please don't forget that I'm still here. Try not to crush me." Although inside, the mercenary was happy that it was finally going to happen and these people would pay for their crimes. But everything around him began to shake with such force that even Kurt, who was already accustomed to the general chaos, was frightened that it was still happening. A monstrous wind rose around him, and the man realized with horror that he was being pulled closer to the dragon. Opening its wide mouth, the dragon roared and began to suck in air with such force that everything around began to sink into a vacuum. The wizard in the air began to fly toward the dragon's mouth. Everything around him rose into the air. The heroes realized what they had to do. They had to do something while they could still stand on their feet, otherwise everything else would fall apart. The wizard pointed his finger somewhere in the direction of the shelter, telling everyone to run there before they were all burned alive. Vera looked ahead. She already understood what Eren was going to do. If he couldn't get under it, he would simply burn everything around him with a wall of fire. And that's exactly what happened. Rising into the air, the dragon swung his wings and released a huge jet of fire from his mouth, like a tornado. With his last ounce of strength, the wizard gathered all his magic into one fist, hoping to protect himself with the power of snow and ice. Vera also tried with all her might. She turned to her goddess for help, and a whirlwind began to swirl around her. And only the poor, defenseless mercenary, having no powers of his own, was simply blown away by the powerful gust. The man struggled to recover from the powerful blow, and it was only the force of the shockwave. Even dragon hunters would not be able to cope with it. Clearly pleased with his actions, Eren rose up. "Well, how do you like that, little people? I even feel a little sorry for you because I had to burn everything down." But suddenly he stopped. To his surprise, the dragon saw that all four were under some kind of protective dome, while chaos reigned around them. The sorcerers were trying to defend themselves, and they were doing quite well. The fire could not penetrate their barrier. Our hero flew into a rage. "Yes, in the end, when even one of you goes to the other world, I'm tired of it." Suddenly, the sorcerer used a spectral arrow and fired several laser beams directly at the dragon. Poor Eren felt his body being hit by something at tremendous speed, and even he couldn't withstand it. In the end, his powers left his body, and the huge dragon fell to the ground with a crash. He was in terrible pain. His thick scales couldn't withstand the impact. Putting on his cloak, the sorcerer smiled. "Well, this dragon is certainly quite large, but it has very weak breath. That's its weakness. We can stop it without any problems." Vera and Pluto were already prepared. "Well, then we must unleash all our power on it. We'll discuss it later." Darius rushed forward. "Now we must destroy him." The man gathered all his strength and redirected it into his blade. The sorcerer put his hand forward. It was the heat of hell. Gathering all his magic into his fist, he prepared to use the most powerful spell. Raising her hands, Vera cast a spell, and shards of ice began to swirl around her. All this power fell upon the poor dragon and began to strike him with incredible force. Even Eren could not have coped with it. Finally, he swung his huge tail in an attempt to hit someone, but it hurt me. Don't you understand? Seeing that his opponents were dodging again, the dragon flew into a rage. "How much longer are you going to torment me?" Then, armed with his huge sword, he swung it and stuck it into the ground. It was a blow from a light sword. The dragon felt huge shards piercing his entire body. He opened his mouth and screamed in rage. In the end, even the huge dragon could not withstand the monstrous onslaught and fell onto its back, losing consciousness. Seeing that the enemy was almost defeated, Darius looked ahead with hope. "We finally finished it off. The dragon is defeated." The sorcerer stopped him. "Wait, don't rush. It could be a trap to knock you off balance. He could just be pretending." But it seemed that Eren was not pretending. He was lying almost unconscious, and his eyes were now completely yellow, without pupils. The poor guy was out cold. Suddenly, Pluto and Vera began to argue. The girl shouted, "What was the point of shouting the name of the spell? Are you a superhero or something?" The dragon was still conscious but immobilized. "These people are so strong. Is there really nothing I can do?" How frustrating. The stories Darius had told him about how he had destroyed a dragon in his prime flashed before his eyes. And then the boy heard that everything was made from the dragon's remains. The decorations on the walls, everything. Suddenly, the earth began to shake. The heroes were distracted and finally realized that the dragon was still alive. They turned to him in surprise. But no, that's not what flashed in the White Knight's eyes. Real shock. Could this dragon still be alive? We unleashed all our power on it. Gathering all his strength in his fist, Eren finally came to his senses and soared into the air. With just a few flaps of his wings, he was now in a real rage. The sorcerer almost fainted, but he regained his composure. How did he still have strength left? Prepare for attack. Seeing the dragon fly away, the wizard immediately used his magic shield to protect his comrades in any way he could. Vera also understood that he was trying to use dragon's breath again, so she had to put up a shield somehow. But suddenly, everyone stopped when they saw the dragon simply flying away. It seemed like it was just running away, or maybe it was just our imagination. The wizard couldn't believe his eyes at what was happening. Why wasn't the dragon attacking him? Had it run away? For a few seconds, the hero stood there in complete confusion. It just took off and flew away without attacking or finishing them off. How could this be understood? Looking up, the White Knight was in complete shock. The dragon had run away. Wow, this is the first time in my life I've seen something like this. But the wizard still couldn't believe his luck. It couldn't be that the red dragon had just taken off and run away from people. Somewhere in a remote forest, the mercenary Kurt just sat, leaning against a tree. He could no longer stop the bleeding with spells, and it was getting worse by the second. The man sighed heavily and leaned against the tree trunk. If he had known it would end like this, he could have helped. What was this? The man was so exhausted that even blinking was difficult for him, but he was still holding on. He had spent more than a decade on the battlefield and had never lost, destroying countless people and dreaming of revenge. In the end, he became the strongest mercenary. But why? That question remained unanswered, and the man himself did not know the answer. At the moment when he was needed most, he could do nothing but lie unconscious while the battle raged on. I'm just a weakling, it turns out. His body began to go numb. Kurt thought with horror, is this really the end? Is this really how his life will end? He hadn't achieved anything yet, hadn't had time to take revenge. Finally, gathering his strength in his fist under the pressure of rage, the man tried to get up. No, I can't just stay like this. I still have unfinished business. He tried to stand up, but his body still wouldn't obey him. Behind him, he heard a familiar voice. You're pretty strong after all, capable of something. The sorcerer stood there with his entire team. The man stretched out his arm and cast his last spell. Looking at him, Pluto even felt pity for the poor fellow, who was a good spellcaster after all. Without turning around, the sorcerer said, you have to be careful all the time. Even some ancient petty grudge can cause you great harm. He smiled. Although, who knows? Maybe I would have used such an opportunity if it had presented itself, but it's too late to talk about that now. Darius stood behind him with his head bowed. The man was depressed by something. Life is so unfair, no matter how you look at it. You can't help but feel a little sorry for him. The sorcerer looked at the others and smiled. How could it be otherwise? Life is always unfair. Accept it. The events moved to a strange village on the outskirts, where there was a small, neat house from which voices could be heard. A woman stood near the house and shouted, take more mushrooms with you for lunch. We need to make fried rice. A child stood nearby, looking just like her. Smiling, he nodded and headed into the thick forest. He ran along the forest path, humming a little song about fried rice. He couldn't wait to finally have a good meal. Noticing some mushrooms near the road, he knelt down. Here's what I need. Let's gather them and go home. But suddenly, there was a loud noise. He looked up and saw smoke rising into the sky behind the trees. Something had obviously happened there. The child stopped and looked in surprise at the smoke. What was happening there? There were no monsters here, and there never had been. Maybe a cliff had collapsed. Forgetting about his mushrooms, he rushed forward into the thicket to see what had happened. Hiding in the nearest bushes, the child peeked out and looked ahead with wide eyes full of curiosity, but suddenly cried out. Before him lay a colossal red dragon. The child had never seen anything like it and was literally frozen with fear. Aaron, seeing another person, realized that he had to run away immediately, otherwise they would start beating him again. Turning his head, the dragon greeted him. His voice was rough and scary. Naturally, the child was frightened, turned around, and ran away. But suddenly he stopped, turning his still frightened head. How could he understand this polite dragon in books? They are completely different. But suddenly, light spread everywhere, and our hero began to transform back into a human being, and in a second, he became a boy. The last thing he managed to say was, help me, and then he collapsed to the ground, completely exhausted. The child completely forgot about his mushrooms and bent down. Wow, the dragon just turned into a boy. How is that even possible? Finally, after several hours, Aaron struggled to open his eyes. His whole body ached, and he was lying on a soft bed, covered in bandages. Coming to his senses, the boy stretched and exhaled. Of course, it was all a dream. Apparently, he still thought that everything that had happened was a dream. Getting up from his place, the boy looked around and was surprised to find himself lying on a soft bed. Where am I? He snorted. Waking up in a strange bed after fainting was already becoming a habit. But now, seriously, where was he and what had happened? He heard someone's gentle voice from the side and finally woke up when he heard it. Aaron shuddered with surprise and looked in the direction from which the voice was coming. Who are you? A woman with a gentle face stood in front of him, smiling and looking at him. She was holding some clothes in her hands. Our hero just looked at her with a blank stare, trying to figure out who this woman was and what he was doing in her house. The stranger's expression changed. She smiled and said, I'm the mother of the boy who saved you. That's all. Our hero began to cry. So that's it. I really did meet some boy before I passed out. Could he have brought me here? The woman put the clothes on the bed. I'm sorry, I ran out of bandages, so I tied it with ordinary cloth. It won't get infected, so don't worry. It will be difficult to move at first, so you'll have to get used to it, she said with maternal warmth and tenderness. Our hero realized that despite her good-natured appearance, this woman was very dangerous. She literally radiated some kind of strange energy. Aaron remembered very well that everyone who was initially friendly to him later revealed their true nature, as was the case with the mercenary and the maid. He clutched his clothes to his chest and looked at the woman cautiously. Let her just try to do something, and then it would all be over. But the doors flew open and the child appeared in the doorway. With his arms outstretched, he ran into the room shouting, "Mom, he's finally awake!" The woman smiled and looked at her child. Yes, he just came too. Here, meet him. By this time, Aaron had already gotten dressed and looked more presentable. The stranger disappeared behind the door, saying that she was going to wash the laundry in the river. You get to know our guest. The boys looked at her. Aaron was still cautiously examining everything around him, and this new acquaintance, the boy, just laughed and rejoiced. He looked at our hero and asked, "Are you all right now, Mr. Dragon? I hope you're feeling better." After recovering a little, Aaron finally paid attention to his savior. "Yes, everything is fine. I'm better now, thank you." The child clenched his fists. "No one can know that you're a dragon, right? I didn't even tell my mom that you're a dragon, so you don't have to worry." Our hero was a little embarrassed by such intensity. "Yes, exactly. Thank you." He didn't even know how to respond to that. The child scratched the back of his head. "You don't have to be so formal with me. You're probably several thousand years older than me." Suddenly, our hero's stomach growled treacherously. They looked at each other for a few seconds, and then Aaron finally decided to say, "Listen, do you have anything to eat?" Soon, there was sliced bread and a few pieces of either butter or cheese on the table, and it all smelled delicious. Without waiting for a special invitation, Aaron immediately began to eat and immediately tipped the mug of water into his mouth. His new acquaintances looked with interest at the strange boy who had so unexpectedly invaded their ordinary rural life. Finally, the child decided to ask, "Excuse me, but what brought you to the human world?" Aaron looked up from his food. The boy continued, "Could it be that the harbinger of the end of the world has appeared? Well, the demon king or the supreme dragon? Are you going to go to the dungeon and fight him?" Swallowing a piece of cheese, our hero just narrowed his eyes. "He thinks I'm some kind of legendary dragon from an adventure novel. It's a pity to disappoint him, of course." But the child was already looking at him with shining eyes. "You'll probably join the team of heroes to save the world." Aaron didn't even know what to say. After all, he had just run away from home. In the end, our hero just snorted and frowned. "Okay, it's time to end this pointless conversation." "No, sorry, I can't tell you." The child stopped with his mouth open and stared at him with wide eyes in surprise. And then he started chattering again. "Of course, I understand that the fate of the whole world depends on it, and an ordinary child cannot know about it." Aaron continued to chew his bread. Hearing this, he almost choked and rolled his eyes. "God, what have you come up with now? Listen, can I have some water, please?" Having already gotten to know each other, the two new friends went into the forest to take a walk and finally clear their heads. Our hero, of course, tried to adapt to rural life, but it didn't go well. The first time, he almost knocked over a jug of water. Then there was a normal family dinner with some kind of soup and, of course, fragrant bread. It was quite tasty. Then they went back to the forest, where Aaron almost ate some poisonous mushrooms, but thank God his new friend stopped him in time. In the end, he had to explain to the family that he was a spellcaster. The guy didn't lie, but he did surprise his new acquaintances. They even gave him a bag with a small amount of food and money for the future. Aaron was delighted. "A new adventure?" The boy bowed. "Thank you very much for taking care of me, but now it's time for me to go." The woman looked after him warmly, wishing him a safe journey, and the child shouted, "Good luck, sir!" Our hero only looked back at them and looked at them with bright yellow eyes, for the first time in his life feeling no danger. He waved goodbye and disappeared into the forest. And for the first time in his life, our young dragon felt what people usually call the bitterness of parting. After walking a little way into the forest, the boy sat down near a rock to have a snack. "So now I am completely free. I have a little food and money." Anaya. He ate only potatoes and a piece of cheese and thought to himself, "Finally, I can become a real warrior and seek adventure." Thinking deeply, Aaron began to ponder. "So there are only 3 ways to become a brave fighter. That's right, isn't it? Well, at least that's what I read in books. The first way is a common peasant who lived a quiet life and then suddenly found himself drawn into adventures. And then it turns out that he is descended from a legendary line of great warriors." Thinking for a moment, Aaron puffed out his cheeks. "Although I don't think there were any noblemen or knights in my family, I am a dragon after all." The second option is a brave adventurer who helps destroy the Demon King, meeting his friends along the way and ultimately saving the beautiful princess. That doesn't work either. The guy lowered his head. "I've never been a prince, not even close. Although I've already been a princess, but that's not good enough." But there was a third way, to wander in the guise of a mercenary, and along the way, reveal his supernatural powers and eradicate the evil of the king in the human world. This is an excellent option. Our hero immediately jumped up in the dragon's place because mercenaries can be real. Great, I'll become a mercenary. He raised his hands and shouted so that even the birds nearby began to be frightened. An option had been found. He smiled broadly, but then a logical question arose. Where does one actually become a mercenary? I don't even know. Okay, let's figure it out. First, I need to find a village. He jumped up and ran straight ahead without looking where he was going. This was the beginning of my journey. Meanwhile, somewhere high in the heavens, the king of the red dragons hovered with his fiery spirit, tracking our hero all this time. At some point, the man sensed the presence of the child somewhere nearby, right under his feet. Lowering his head, he looked in front of him. Yes, it was definitely here. There could be no mistake. It was time to start searching. They were standing in the very place where our hero had recently fought the four heroes, as evidenced by the huge trench that Aaron had torn out with his breath. The king went down and examined the area. The fire spirit constantly followed him. The ghost looked at him. Sir, do you think they dealt with Aaron? I find that hard to believe, but we can't rule it out. The man looked ahead. I doubt it, of course, but anything is possible. There was definitely a serious battle here. The fire spirit stood behind the man. I'm sorry, sir, that I couldn't be of more help to you. This is all I can do. I don't think I can do anything else. The man turned around. Listen, you gave him a couple of fire spirits. You can track them when Aaron summons the creatures. The king looked at him intently. I don't think that's possible, your majesty, if a human were to do it. Then maybe, but he's a dragon. The king sat down on the nearest rock. You know, it's just a normal runaway. Who would have thought he would turn out to be such a problem child? He lowered his head. But what could happen if something happened? That's the problem, you understand. You remember what happened to the white dragon not so long ago? It's scary to think what will happen to this little one if he encounters an enemy. The man frowned. Well, okay. In any case, if something happens to him, it will be the fault of humans. That much is clear. The fire ghost looked at him with slightly frightened eyes, as if he himself had not expected this. The only dragon, the oldest of all that exist, possesses power comparable to that of a god, and he alone can destroy the entire world. The Fire King looked at him. Yes, if this old man really gets angry, half of humanity will burn in his flames instantly. Kiadris sighed heavily. Not only humanity you don't understand, half of all living things will evaporate in an instant. The fire spirit thought for a moment. Listen, he wouldn't act so rashly. After all, he is a wise creature. But the king only asked him to take his word for it. The fire spirit agreed. All right, I don't remember dragons ever worrying about the consequences of their actions. We must contact the boy as soon as we see him. The Dragon King looked ahead with a weary gaze. Finally, the man stood up. You know, I don't blame you, my friend. Humans cannot defeat a dragon, even a young one. The problem is that they cannot leave such destruction behind. The fire ghost looked at his interlocutor. Are you saying that these were the traces of those who destroyed the white dragon? Isn't that so? The man gritted his teeth. That possibility cannot be ruled out. That's why I'm very worried, because we pose a great danger to people. Meanwhile, the four heroes sat in the library and discussed their escape plan. In any case, they had already captured the kingdom, so the plan had already been carried out. The wizard waved his hand. Although we didn't manage to catch that little dragon, at least we destroyed all evidence of his involvement. The man smiled broadly. We can consider it a success, so there's no need to worry now. Everything is going as well as it could. The White Knight intervened. I don't like this at all. I refuse to face the red dragon again. I've had enough. The wizard just sighed. Here you go whining again, Darius. There are four of us. What else is there to fear? Don't forget that my dragon slayers.